Hi guys. Tonight we step out into the frost. The sky glows hard and silver, and you can hear the snow creak under your boots with each step. You're miles from anything you'd call a town, no electric hum, no headlights. Just the cold breath of a wilderness so wide it almost laughs at you. The kind of place that makes you realize how small a human heartbeat really is against an open plain. You probably won't survive this first winter at least, not without a roof over your head and some serious improvisation. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere warm tonight, let me know your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights and imagine yourself stepping into that world where frost laces every windowless frame and home is still a dream you have to build with your own hands. The first settlers arrived before comfort had a name. You trudge through drifts that swallow your calves, your breath freezing on your scarf. Around you, the land is quiet except for the groan of trees shifting under ice. The wagon ruts behind you have already filled with snow, as if the path back east has vanished overnight. Ahead lies a clearing you scouted last week, a modest patch near a stream where you'll try to stake your claim. Nothing here is ready for you, not even the ground. But you've brought a few tools, a bundle of hope, and a stubborn refusal to turn around. Historians still argue whether these early settlers were driven more by desperation or ambition. Some say it was land hunger, the promise of owning something no one could take. Others think it was simple escapism, the same restless urge that pushes someone to hike beyond the last trail marker today. Either way, you've joined their ranks, arriving just as the world turns white. You pitch a tent of canvas so thin you can see starlight through it. Inside, you stamp your feet and light a small fire in a shallow pit, feeding it twigs and a strip of bark. The smoke stings your eyes, sneaking under the fabric roof. You cough and laugh at yourself, because in this frozen wilderness, even choking smoke feels like company. Outside, the wind yanks at the tent stakes as if testing your will. The frontier has no patience for hesitation. If you linger, the cold claims you by morning. Still, the wilderness isn't cruel, it's just indifferent. The cold presses down like a teacher, forcing you to learn fast. You realize the first lesson quickly. Survival starts with shelter. But how do you build a house when the trees are half frozen and your fingers already numb? You start small. You cut branches and lean them together into a crude lean-to, covering it with bark and snow. Snow, you discover, is an excellent insulator, a soft armor against wind. The irony isn't lost on you. The very thing trying to freeze you can also keep you warm. You lie under that makeshift roof your first night, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of smoke and home. Every sound becomes enormous, the crack of a branch, the moan of distant wolves, the shifting of ice in the nearby stream. You pull the blanket tighter, feeling both terribly alone and strangely alive. Tomorrow, you'll start cutting logs. But for now, the stars look like embers scattered by some divine hearth above you. A mainstream historical fact. Many frontier settlers arrived too late in the season to build before snow fell. Some froze, others dug into hillsides, making earthen dugouts like ancient cave dwellers. In parts of Kansas and Nebraska, families literally lived beneath the ground their first winter, lighting fires at the mouth of the dugout and sleeping under sod roofs that dripped condensation at dawn. You might picture that now, steam rising as they woke, hair damp but hearts beating, alive for another day. Then there's the quirky side of frontier survival. Some settlers reportedly stuffed their boots with rabbit fur and ashes, yes, to soak up moisture and trap heat. Whether it worked or just made a mess, no one's quite sure. The journals don't agree. But you imagine yourself trying it anyway, because when the night cuts through every layer you own, you'll believe anything that promises warmth. As the wind howls, you pull a stick from the fire and watch it glow. That tiny circle of orange feels like civilization in miniature. You think about everyone else scattered across the land, other small fires blinking in the dark, each one a family hoping not to become a story of failure. You aren't alone after all, not really. Just unseen, part of a constellation of survival flickering across the plains. Morning comes grey and brittle, frost lines your eyelashes, and the stream runs under a crust of ice. You stamp your feet to feel them again. The world has simplified overnight into one command: build. You grip your axe, its metal biting cold, and start swinging at the nearest pine. Chips fly, breath clouds, muscles scream. The sound of chopping echoes through the forest like a heartbeat, slow, steady, defiant. Each log that falls is a small victory against the cold. Historians still debate whether early settlers chose their building spots more for convenience or sheer chance. Some experts argue they followed indigenous trails and trade routes, seeking proximity to water and sheltering hills. Others claim they simply stopped when their oxen refused to go farther. Either way, your clearing is now your destiny. You can almost see it: a house rising, smoke curling from a chimney, the glow of fire through a window. You'll sleep there soon, wrapped in something more permanent than hope. For now, the work begins. The axe sings through the frozen air. The smell of fresh pine fills your lungs, sharp and sweet, as if the forest itself approves of your effort. By noon, your shoulders ache and your stomach growls. You gnaw on cold bread and feel oddly triumphant. Each cut in the wood feels like a declaration that this land will know your name. As dusk returns, you light another small fire and look around the clearing. Piles of logs, a leaning shelter, and your own weary reflection in a pool of ice. It's not much, but it's a beginning. The silence that once felt hostile now feels respectful, almost listening. You realize that warmth isn't just about heat, it's about making the world acknowledge you. The frontier doesn't welcome you, but it does notice your persistence. Before you crawl into your blanket again, you whisper a promise to yourself, to the unseen stars, maybe even to the frost. Tomorrow, the real house begins. You wake with the sun glinting off the frost. The air bites so sharply that each breath feels like inhaling tiny shards of glass. You stretch your aching arms and look at the pile of logs you cut yesterday. They lie there like sleeping giants, waiting for purpose. This morning, your task is to turn them into walls. You rub your palms together, grip the axe again, and begin. Every swing echoes through the trees, a steady rhythm that keeps your thoughts from freezing. You feel the thud of the blade reverberate up your arms. Wood chips scatter, catching the light as they fall. The work is slow, heavy, and oddly satisfying. There is no blueprint, no architect, just your hands and your instincts. You stack, test, adjust, and learn as you go. Historians still argue whether early frontier cabins followed European techniques or local improvisations. Some claim settlers borrowed Scandinavian notching styles, carefully interlocking logs for strength. Others insist they invented methods on the spot, driven by necessity and frostbite. Either way, you can almost hear your own ancestors muttering advice across time. Keep the seams tight, keep the roof low, and never trust a north wind. You drag the first log into place. It scrapes the ground like a reluctant animal. Sweat freezes on your brow, and your breath forms small clouds that drift upward like prayers. You notice how every decision matters. Too much gap between logs, and the wind will whistle through at midnight. Too little, and you will waste strength trying to force them flush. You are not just building a house. You are learning the language of wood. The forest feels alive around you, almost amused. A crow caws overhead as if commenting on your progress. You pause, smile, and wipe your hands on your coat. There is something comforting about the repetition of it all. Chop, drag, lift, align. The rhythm soothes your mind even as your muscles protest. A mainstream fact: most early cabins on the American frontier were single pen structures, simple rectangles with one room for everything. Cooking, sleeping, eating, even giving birth happened within the same four log walls. Space was a luxury, privacy, a rumor. Yet these rough rooms contained entire worlds of laughter, work, and whispered stories by lamplight. You feel the meaning of that as you raise the second log, resting it on the notched corners of the first. It fits imperfectly, like everything human, but it holds. You test the weight with your hands. It creaks softly, a sound that somehow feels like trust. Then comes the quirky part. Some settlers believed singing to the logs helped them settle tighter. Others spat into the notches for luck before hammering in the wooden pegs. You try neither, but the thought amuses you. In the lonely woods, superstition can feel as necessary as nails. By midday, your back screams for mercy. You sit on a stump and chew a strip of salted meat, looking at the half-built frame. It is crooked, uneven, and absolutely magnificent. The smell of sap lingers in the air, mixing with smoke from your tiny campfire. You feel something ancient stirring inside you, pride without an audience. As you rest, your thoughts wander. You imagine the first families who came before you, traveling for weeks in rattling wagons, their children coughing from dust and cold. They must have looked at their raw surroundings with both awe and terror, and still they built. Every house in history began with someone refusing to freeze. You start again before your body can change its mind. The logs grow heavier with each lift, but your movements become surer. You learn where to place your weight, how to balance one end while propping the other. The rough bark scrapes your gloves, leaving the scent of resin on your skin. The walls rise, uneven but proud. Gaps form between the logs, wide enough for the wind to gossip through. You know you will need to seal them later, but that is tomorrow's challenge. For now, you focus on alignment and strength. The work pulls you into a trance, a dance between exhaustion and determination. Historians still debate what drove settlers to build entirely by hand instead of waiting for help. Was it stubborn pride, or the sheer impossibility of delay? Maybe both. Whatever the reason, you feel it now. The act of building is its own prayer. Each log laid down is a small rebellion against the indifferent cold. Evening settles early in the forest. Shadows stretch long and blue, and the world smells of sap and smoke. You light your campfire again, sitting close enough to feel its small but faithful heat. Behind you, the walls catch the firelight, glowing gold in places where sap oozes from the wood. For the first time, it looks like a home, not yet safe, but real. You think about how many families repeated this ritual across continents, from the Canadian north to the Russian steppe, from Nordic forests to the Appalachian valleys. People everywhere once raised walls from whatever grew nearby. Each swing of the axe was a shared heartbeat of humanity. You are part of that rhythm now. Your fire cracks, sending sparks upward. You remember the sound of your first chop that morning and realize how far you have come in a single day. The trees stand silent, as if watching their fallen kin take new shape. You feel almost guilty, then grateful. The forest has given you shelter, and in return, you give it purpose. Tomorrow you will start sealing the gaps. You will learn what chinking is, and why it matters more than anyone tells you. But tonight, you let the fire burn low, the walls standing like patient guardians around your dreams. You lie down on the cold ground, your back against a log, and stare up at the stars framed by wooden corners. The sky is endless, and you are small, but your house already exists in your mind. You can almost feel the warmth of its future hearth flickering across your face. Sleep comes slow and heavy, carrying with it the scent of pine, the ache of work, and the quiet knowledge that survival begins not with comfort, but with construction. The morning smells of damp earth and pine sap. Your breath fogs the air as you step into the half-built frame of your new home. The walls stand like tired soldiers, rough and uneven, but proud in their defiance against the wind. You run your hand along the cold wood and feel the uneven texture beneath your glove. Every gap, every crack, every whisper of draft reminds you that a house is only as warm as the patience that seals it. You crouch beside the base of the wall and peer through a sliver of daylight slicing in between two logs. A cold draft seeps through, curling around your ankles. That tiny chill is a thief, ready to steal every ounce of warmth your fire can make. You need to stop it. You need to learn the art of chinking. Chinking is not a fancy word. It is survival disguised as mud. You mix what you can find. Wet clay from the riverbank, tufts of dry grass, and bits of moss scraped from nearby rocks. The texture is thick and sticky, cold between your fingers. You knead it like dough, adding small stones for strength. Some settlers used animal hair or ashes. Others even mixed in straw soaked in sour milk. It sounds absurd, but the milk helped bind the clay and made it last through storms. Historians still argue whether chinking began as a borrowed European technique or a local invention refined through trial and error. Some say Scandinavian log builders brought the idea across the Atlantic. Others claim indigenous people had already perfected similar sealing methods long before settlers arrived. You do not know who is right, and you realize it does not matter. The wind does not care about origins. It just wants in. You smear the first handful into a crack. It squelches satisfyingly, filling the space like thick paint. You press it deeper with a stick, shaping it to follow the contour of the wood. The cold clay sticks to your gloves, to your coat, even to your face when you swipe your forehead. By the time you finish one wall, you look half sculpted yourself. A mainstream fact: chinking could take days, sometimes weeks, depending on the size of the cabin. Many families had to redo it every year, especially after heavy rains. It was a living part of the home, always cracking, always needing care. In that way, the house was like the people inside it, held together by persistence and repair. You pause to stretch, your back stiff from bending. The world feels smaller inside your growing walls, quieter too. The wind now whispers instead of howling. You can almost imagine what it will sound like when a fire crackles in the corner and voices murmur over supper. You press in another handful of clay and smile. Warmth is not given. It is earned, one handful at a time. The quirky side of chinking was how personal it became. Families added whatever they had on hand. There are records of settlers using crushed seashells, feathers, and even shredded letters to fill the cracks. One diary from the 1842 mentions using the ashes of a burned Bible mixed with clay after lightning struck a barn. The writer said the walls held fast through all storms, though historians still question if it was faith or physics at work. As you work, your fingers grow numb, but your rhythm steadies. Scoop, press, smooth, move. The wall begins to look solid, its gaps dark and sealed. You step back and admire the transformation. The cabin is starting to feel less like a pile of wood and more like a shelter. You can almost see the steam from cooking pots rising inside, the shadows of people moving near the fire. Historians still debate which material worked best for insulation. Some argue moss was superior for holding heat. Others point to clay for its longevity. You realize the best material is whatever you can reach before sundown. There is wisdom in that simplicity. The day drifts on. Sunlight filters through the bare trees, catching on floating dust and flakes of clay. The smell of wet earth hangs heavy in the air, mixing with pine resin and smoke from your small campfire. Every sense feels sharpened, alive. You are no longer just a builder. You are a craftsman of comfort, sculpting warmth from mud and willpower. By late afternoon, you stand inside the nearly finished cabin, testing for drafts with your bare hand. The walls no longer breathe as much. The chill still lingers, but it feels manageable now, a muted presence instead of an open threat. You smile to yourself. You have taken one step closer to sleeping without shivering. You light the fire and sit near it, listening to the hiss of moisture burning off your gloves. The flames dance orange and gold, their light playing across the rough surfaces you have shaped. You realize this simple act, filling gaps, sealing cracks, is not just about the wind. It is about claiming a boundary between the wild and the human. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, quiet and steady. You can hear it tapping softly on the roof beams. The sound is delicate, almost kind. You imagine tomorrow, when you will finally level the floor and perhaps build a bed off the ground. The thought of lying on dry planks instead of cold dirt feels like luxury. You lean back against the new wall. The clay cools slowly, hardening into a patchwork of grey and brown. You run your hand over it and feel the faint heat from your fire seeping through the structure. This cabin may be small, but tonight it feels like the center of the universe. You look at your hands, crusted with dried earth, and think of all the hands that came before yours. People who mixed the same clay, sang the same work songs, and hoped for the same thing, a night's rest without fear of freezing. You whisper a small thanks into the warm air. The fire pops, sending a tiny ember skipping toward the chinked wall, where it dies with a sigh. You smile and stretch your legs. Tomorrow will bring new aches, new repairs, and new lessons. But for now, you have a roof overhead, sealed walls around you, and the comforting illusion that winter is losing interest. You close your eyes, feeling the warmth spread, the silence deepen, and the first true sense of home settle over you like a thick blanket. The first night on your new floor feels like a small victory. The dirt beneath you is firm, dark, and packed smooth. You press your palm against it and sense how the cold rises from below, creeping up through your bones like a secret you cannot unlearn. The air smells of clay, smoke, and pine sap. The cabin walls keep out most of the wind now, but the earth still claims your heat without apology. You soon realize that the ground itself can be as merciless as the air. You need insulation, though the word has not yet entered your vocabulary. You know only the feeling of loss, of warmth slipping away into something endless. So you begin to study the floor. How did other families stop the cold from climbing through it? Some journals from early homesteaders mention covering the earth with woven mats or animal hides. Others speak of laying a layer of straw beneath boards, or even packing dry moss mixed with ashes to hold the heat. Each method was a whisper of comfort in a world that seemed determined to test the human spirit. A detail, often noted in early settlement records, is how floors were the last feature added to a cabin. People focused on walls and roofs first, leaving the ground bare for months. In that time, they swept it daily to keep dust down, and sometimes scattered herbs like mint or sweetgrass to mask the smell of damp soil. The scent must have been faint but reassuring, a reminder that cleanliness and civilization could still exist in a wilderness of mud. You gather straw from the nearby clearing, golden and brittle under the weak Sunday. As you spread it across the floor, it rustles softly, a fragile barrier between you and the frost. You notice how sound changes with it. Footsteps muffled, echoes gone. The room feels smaller, warmer, almost alive. For a moment, you imagine a future where rugs and polished planks will replace this makeshift padding, but for now, it is enough. Some accounts from Scandinavian settlers tell of mixing animal blood with clay to seal floors before winter, a practice that hardened the surface like stone. It sounds gruesome, yet it worked, forming a dense layer that trapped warmth and kept pests out. You doubt you will try it yourself, but you file it away in memory. Necessity has a way of making even the strangest ideas seem reasonable when the temperature drops another 10 degrees. Experts disagree on how much comfort these early households truly managed to achieve. Some say that a well-built cabin with a packed earth floor could stay 20 degrees warmer than the air outside. Others argue that the difference was minimal, and that true comfort came not from the architecture, but from the people who shared the space. You sense both might be true. Warmth, like courage, often multiplies when shared. You pause your work and look around. The sunlight slips in through a small gap in the roof boards, forming a pale beam that falls across your boots. Dust motes swirl inside it, tiny galaxies turning in slow circles. The silence feels almost sacred. You wonder how many lives began and ended in places like this, where luxury meant the absence of wind and the steady crackle of fire. There is an odd superstition among some frontiersmen that sleeping directly on earth drains your vitality, as if the soil feeds on human dreams. To ward off that imagined theft, they placed coins or smooth stones beneath their sleeping area, believing metal would block the pull of the ground. You decide to try it, half as a joke, half as insurance. You press a small coin into the dirt under your future bed and smile at the absurdity of protecting your soul with currency. Evening creeps in again, quiet and blue. You light the fire, and its reflection shivers across the newly spread straw. The scent of smoke mingles with the faint sweetness of the dried grass. You sit on a log and feel the warmth pool around your knees. It is not much, but it feels earned. You remember something you once read. People who built from nothing always slept deeper. Their dreams waited with gratitude. You think that might be true. You start to hum, a low tune with no melody, just rhythm. The sound fills the cabin, soft and round. Music was another kind of insulation, one that wrapped the mind when blankets failed. Across the frontier, people sang to forget the cold, to feel larger than their surroundings. Some songs were work chants, others prayers disguised as lullabies. You hum a fragment of one without words, just to hear it echo against the new walls. When the fire settles into quiet embers, you lie down on your straw floor and pull your blanket close. The earth beneath you no longer feels like an enemy. It feels ancient, steady, patient. The kind of patience that built mountains and will outlast everything you make. You think of future nights when the frost thickens outside, when your breath will fog the air even indoors, and you will still be here, warm enough, alive enough. Letters from settlers describe moments just like this, lying awake and listening to the world outside their unfinished homes. Some wrote about hearing wolves howl across frozen lakes. Others described the creak of trees splitting under ice, a sound that carried for miles in the stillness. They often admitted that fear never disappeared. It just learned to live quietly beside gratitude. You understand that now. The fire pops, startling you for a heartbeat. You laugh softly, a small sound swallowed by the walls. Then you close your eyes and breathe in the warmth, the faint sweetness of straw, the rich, dark scent of earth. For the first time since you arrived, you do not shiver. You drift towards sleep, wrapped in the strange comfort of imperfection, aware that every cozy house begins with someone learning to lie gently on the ground before daring to rise above it. Morning arrives with a hush that feels like a held breath. The air inside your cabin smells faintly of smoke and damp clay, but the cold has eased. You sit up slowly, your joints stiff from sleep on the straw floor. The frost on the inside of the log walls catches the early light, sparkling like a thin crust of silver. For a brief moment, you forget how harsh the world outside can be. Your next task is simple to name, but vital to master: fire. You already have a place for it, a rough pit of stones near one corner. Last night's embers still glow faintly, waiting to be coaxed back into life. You lean close, blowing gently, feeding it slivers of bark and twigs. The flame grows with a small sigh, curling upward, as if grateful for attention. That faint orange light fills the cabin with the illusion of safety. The heart of every frontier home was the hearth. Letters from early families often describe it as both blessing and burden. Without it, food could not be cooked, wet clothes could not dry, and frozen fingers could not heal. Yet it was also a source of danger. A stray spark could undo weeks of labor in a heartbeat. Settlers learned to respect fire as both a servant and a rival. You spend the morning gathering stones for a chimney. The stream nearby offers a mix of flat shale and rounded granite. You haul them one by one, your breath coming out in ragged puffs, stacking them into a crude square that rises toward the roof. The sound of clinking rock echoes in the clearing. You smear wet clay between the gaps, sealing them as best you can. Your hands are raw and caked with mud, but the structure holds steady. Old building guides suggest that many families built their chimneys from wood lined with mud, a compromise between scarcity and necessity. It worked, though sometimes the heat cracked the clay, and fires escaped into the rafters. Later, when brick-making spread westward, people rebuilt with stone and brick, calling those early wooden chimneys widow-makers. You think of that now and double-check every joint. A curious note found in a settler's diary mentions using salt mixed into the clay mortar to keep it from crumbling when wet. It was a small act of chemistry long before the word was common knowledge. You decide to try it, sprinkling the salt-like seasoning between stones, amused at how the line between cooking and construction often blurs out here. By noon, your chimney stands complete, rough-edged but proud. You light a fire beneath it, watching the smoke rise, twist, and vanish through the narrow opening above. For a moment, you hold your breath, waiting to see if the draft will draw properly. The flame steadies, the smoke flows upward instead of filling the room, and you exhale in relief. The cabin smells clean for the first time, touched with that ancient perfume of burning wood. Some researchers believe the placement of a hearth defined the entire layout of a home. In colder regions, people built them centrally so that the heat reached every wall. Others pushed them to one side, allowing for storage or sleeping space behind. You had no guide but instinct, and it seems to have served you well. You sit beside the fire now, palms stretched toward it, feeling life return to your fingers. There is a folk saying among the old pioneers, if the smoke leaves straight, the house will hold steady. You glance up, following the line of grey rising from your chimney. It curls gently, steady as a thought, before slipping through the roof. You smile. The house approves of you today. With warmth comes imagination. You begin to picture where your bed might stand, where a small table could go. The bare space starts to feel shaped by intent. You reach for your knife and carve a small notch into one of the logs, a marker of progress. This place is changing from shelter to home, from accident to design. As the day fades, the wind rises again. You sit by the fire, feeding it branches and broken twigs. Outside, the snow drifts against the cabin walls, muffling the sound of the world. The roof creaks, the logs groan, but inside, you feel the calm that comes from building something that fights back against the cold. There is an old argument among historians about whether settlers truly understood how to ventilate their homes properly. Some claim they did, citing evidence of vent holes and adjustable shutters. Others argue most cabins were smoky, stifling places, with children coughing through long winters. You lean toward the latter view, judging by the thin veil of smoke that still hangs near your ceiling, yet even that haze feels homely. In many families, keeping the hearth fire alive through the night was a sacred duty. They would cover the embers with ashes before bed, preserving them until morning. Rekindling the flame became a quiet ritual at dawn. Sometimes, if the fire went out completely, neighbors would walk miles to share a burning stick from their own hearth, carrying it in a metal pan like a secret treasure. You picture that scene now, a glow of shared humanity flickering across frozen hills. The cabin crackles with warmth as the night deepens. Shadows dance along the walls, flickering shapes that mimic ghosts of builders past. You listen to the low hum of burning wood and think how the same sound once echoed across every frontier. Fire was language, comfort, and calendar. Its steady pulse marked the passage of seasons better than any clock. Before you lie down, you cover the coals with ash, whispering a small thanks as you do. The cabin feels alive now, its heart beating softly in the dark. The air tastes faintly of smoke, but also of promise. You stretch out on your straw bed, warmed by your own effort, soothed by the rhythmic whisper of the flames. Outside, the snow continues to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, you drift into sleep, wrapped in the gentle pulse of your first true hearth, a small fire standing guard against the endless winter beyond your door. The dawn sneaks in softly, painting your cabin walls in faded gold. Smoke still hangs faintly in the air, a memory of the night's fire. You stir from sleep and stretch your arms, feeling both stiff and satisfied. The warmth that carried you through the night has settled into the wood itself. You can almost sense it humming quietly, like the heartbeat of the house. You kneel beside the hearth and brush away the ashes. Beneath them, a few coals still glow red, pulsing with hidden life. You smile and feed them a handful of kindling. Soon the fire wakes again, crackling with cheerful defiance. The small flames flick upward, wrapping the logs in light. You realize you have mastered one of the frontier's greatest skills, keeping fire alive not just through the day, but through the endless cold of night. It was a common belief among settlers that a house's fire should never die completely. Many families treated it like a guardian spirit. Diaries from the 1830s mention people whispering short prayers when tending to the coals, as if addressing an old friend. Others left small offerings, such as a pinch of salt or a scrap of bread, tossed into the hearth before sleeping. You find something comforting in that habit. Fire was more than heat, it was the soul of the home. To make the most of it, you need to learn how to sleep near it. Beds placed too close risked catching stray sparks, while those too far away left sleepers shivering before midnight. Some families built raised platforms, their surfaces lined with straw or cloth, so that they could rest within the fire's warmth without lying on the cold floor. You decide to try something similar. You gather leftover logs, stacking them low and steady. Across the top, you lay a few rough planks and cover them with straw. It is simple, but when you lie down and look at the fire, the new height makes all the difference. The heat reaches your face evenly, the light flickering across your closed eyelids. You imagine generations before you doing the same, arranging themselves like planets around a small Sunday. In one old letter from a New England settler, a mother wrote of tucking her children's feet toward the fire while keeping her own hands over their shoulders, creating a ring of warmth that carried them through the worst storms. She called it the circle of keeping. It was less about architecture and more about love, but the result was the same. Everyone survived the night. When you think of that image, you feel a gentle ache for something you do not yet have. Perhaps one day, your own laughter will echo inside these walls. Your own stories will rise with the smoke. For now, the crackle of burning pine is your only companion, but it feels enough. You experiment with the fire, feeding it small branches at intervals, learning the rhythm. Too much wood, and the heat becomes choking. Too little, and the chill creeps back instantly. Somewhere between control and surrender lies the art of warmth. Archaeological evidence from old homesteads shows how people used stones and iron pots as primitive heat storage. They would place heavy rocks near the fire, then carry them to their beds to radiate warmth through the night. You decide to try that too. The stones hiss softly as you set them near the flames, drinking in the heat. When you move one to your bedding later, its warmth spreads slowly, steady and comforting. The trick works. A curious custom mentioned in northern diaries describes using heated bricks wrapped in flannel to warm beds. In some cabins, children were told to thank the brick before sleeping, calling it the quiet friend. That small ritual turned survival into ceremony. You smile at the thought and whisper the same gratitude to your stone before settling it beside your straw bed. Outside, the wind moans across the trees, a reminder that comfort is always borrowed from the elements. You listen to it for a while, your eyelids heavy, the fire painting the room in gentle amber. The cabin feels smaller now, enclosed by warmth and sound. The logs creak occasionally as if stretching. You think about how fragile it all is, yet how perfectly sufficient. Researchers often debate whether early settlers truly slept well through winter or simply endured it. Some evidence suggests they rose often through the night to feed the fire. Others believe their bodies adapted, sleeping in cycles of warmth and wakefulness. Either way, you suspect rest was measured not by hours, but by moments of stillness like this, when the world outside fades and the hearth becomes the center of everything. You roll to your side, facing the flames. Shadows slide along the walls, slow and fluid. The light dances across the clay chinking you pressed days ago, revealing tiny cracks that you'll patch later. For now, you let them be. Imperfection belongs here. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with the mingled scents of smoke, pine, and damp straw. The rhythm of your breath merges with the soft sigh of the fire. It strikes you then how every civilization, in every climate, once shared this same intimacy with flame. From ancient steppe tents to Arctic huts, the first warmth each night came from hands coaxing a spark into light. Fire was the thread that stitched humanity together across oceans and time. You are part of that lineage now. The wind outside fades for a moment, replaced by a deep silence. Snow must be falling again, thick enough to hush the forest. You close your eyes, letting the soundless white world wrap around you. The fire hums softly. Stones radiate heat at your feet, and the cabin feels like a heart beating against the frozen earth. You do not notice when you drift into sleep. The last thing you remember is the glow of embers reflected in the clay, a flicker that looks almost like breathing. For the first time since you arrived, you sleep deeply, without interruption, as if the house itself is watching over you. You wake to a morning wrapped in quiet. The fire has burned down to a faint red core, glowing like the last heartbeat of the night. Frost glitters along the small window openings, sketching lace patterns across the oiled paper panes. The air is cold enough to see your breath, but the cabin still holds a thin pocket of warmth that feels miraculous after so many nights in the open. You sit up slowly, listening to the wood creak as it settles. Today's task is one of comfort rather than survival. A proper bed. Your straw mat has served its purpose, but you dream of something that lifts you farther from the ground and feels a little less like sleeping on stored kindling. Every frontier family, at some point, faced the same challenge. There were no furniture stores waiting down the trail, no wagon load of soft mattresses on the way. Beds had to be imagined into existence from whatever the land offered. Letters and inventories from early cabins describe an astonishing range of ingenuity. Some beds were nothing more than saplings bent into a frame and lashed together with rawhide. Others used split logs, bark still clinging to the edges, arranged into rough rectangles. Nails were rare and precious, so most joints relied on wooden pegs or tight rope knots. You picture your own frame forming, a puzzle of patience and balance. You step outside to gather materials. The air is sharp and dry, the sky pale as porcelain. The trees stand silent except for a distant tapping, perhaps a woodpecker announcing breakfast. You pick a few straight saplings and drag them back to the cabin. The smell of pine follows you like a good omen. Inside, you measure with your hands, cutting each piece to fit. The sound of your knife shaving wood becomes a kind of rhythm, almost musical. In one collection of pioneer journals, there is a mention of something called a rope bed. Instead of solid planks, ropes were woven in a crisscross pattern to support a mattress. The cords sagged over time, so people tightened them with a small wooden peg each morning, giving rise to the saying, "Sleep tight." You decide to try your own version, using leftover hemp cord from your supply bag. The work is slow, but when you finish, the web of rope looks sturdy and neat. You test it carefully, easing your weight onto it. It dips, then holds. The gentle give feels luxurious compared to the hard ground. You laugh quietly at how easily comfort can shift its definition. A few ropes and some patience, and you have achieved what once felt impossible. A note found in the archives of an early Wisconsin homestead mentions that settlers stuffed their mattresses with dried leaves, corn husks, or straw, depending on the season. Sometimes they mixed herbs such as lavender or sage to deter insects and disguise the smell of dampness. You imagine the scent filling your cabin and decide to try something similar. You gather handfuls of straw and crush dried spruce needles into it, their sharp fragrance clearing the air. There are still arguments among historians about what sleeping materials worked best. Some claim straw was warmer but flattened too quickly, while others insist on corn husks for their springiness. You decide the truth probably depended on how tired a person was at the end of the day. Fatigue, after all, is its own kind of softness. You sew together two pieces of rough linen to make a sack and fill it with your mixture. It is uneven and lumpy, but it smells of forest and Sunday. When you place it on the rope frame and lie down, the bed sighs beneath your weight. You close your eyes and listen to the creak of the cords, the faint sound of wind outside, and the slow, living hush of the fire. Some curious notes in old settlers' letters describe how families shared beds not only out of affection but out of necessity. Heat was a collective endeavor. Children slept head to toe, wrapped in a patchwork of furs and quilts. Neighbors visiting for a night often squeezed in wherever there was room. Modesty yielded easily to the need for survival. In that closeness, people learned a kind of quiet intimacy that modern comfort rarely knows. You lie on your new bed and picture those crowded nights. Laughter, shivering, whispers, the smell of smoke in everyone's hair. Warmth spreading from one body to another, until even the coldest corner of the room yielded. The thought feels strangely comforting. Solitude has its power, but shared warmth has its magic. The mattress crackles softly as you shift. Small bits of straw tickle your hands through the fabric. The ropes under you stretch, then settle again. You realize this humble contraption, for all its roughness, carries a kind of grace. It is a bridge between the human body and the stubborn earth, a handmade declaration that life will continue. In some frontier households, building the first bed was considered a milestone. Diaries describe that moment with surprising tenderness, calling it the evening the house became a home. You feel that same change now. The space around you, once just walls and effort, begins to feel personal. The marks of your tools, the uneven joints, the smell of resin, all of it belongs to you. Night comes early. You light a candle and set it near the bed, its flame trembling in the draught. The cabin glows faintly, golden and still. You lie back and pull your blanket to your chin, watching the shadows dance across the ceiling. You think of those who built before you, who rested in beds like this after days of endless labor. Their bones ached, their dreams were simple, and their gratitude immense. The ropes hum faintly as you shift again, almost like a plucked string. It sounds like a lullaby written by the cabin itself. Outside, the wind sighs through the trees, and snow begins to fall once more. You listen until the sound fades into the rhythm of your breathing. As sleep takes you, you smile at how something so rough, so ordinary, can feel as grand as any palace bed. Comfort, you realize, has never been about luxury. It has always been about making peace with the world you have built around you. The wind has softened overnight, and when you open your eyes, the world outside glows with pale morning light. The cold still lingers, but it feels gentler now, as though the forest itself is catching its breath. You sit up slowly, stretching beneath your rough blanket, and the scent of pine and smoke fills your lungs. Your bed held through the night, and your body feels rested in a way it has not for weeks. The next step is warmth that travels beyond the fire's reach, blankets. You wrap your old wool around your shoulders and think of how every household across the frontier needed its own kind of cocoon. Blankets were not luxuries, they were armor, comfort, and inheritance. People traded for them, stitched them, patched them, and guarded them through generations. One good blanket could mean the difference between a comfortable night and frost creeping into your bones before dawn. Old trading ledgers from early settlements list blankets among the most valuable goods, often exchanged for livestock, flour, or even land. The best came from factories back east or from Hudson's Bay traders, woven thick and striped in bold colors. Families prized them as if they were currency. When one began to fray, it was mended until only threads remained. Nothing warm was ever thrown away. You think of the cloth scraps tucked in your pack, the old shirt too thin to wear, the strips of sackcloth that once held grain. Your fingers trace the edges, already planning. Every frontier quilt began this way, not as decoration but as necessity. Yet over time, these patched layers became something more, a story told in fabric. A letter written by a woman in 1847 describes sewing by candlelight while snow howled outside, her hands raw from cold, her children asleep nearby. She wrote, "Each square is a day survived." You imagine her bent over her work, needle flashing, creating warmth from nothing but endurance. The thought humbles you. You gather what cloth you can, spread it across the table, and begin to cut. The scissors scrape softly, rhythmic and soothing. Bits of faded blue and rough brown fall around your feet. You stitch them together with uneven but determined hands. The fabric grows slowly, rough patches meeting smoother ones, mistakes hidden inside seams. You are not aiming for beauty, but something like memory. Archaeologists who studied preserved quilts from the 19th century found that some were lined with layers of newspaper for extra insulation. The ink would sometimes bleed through, leaving ghostly words across the cloth headlines about wars, runaway horses, or advertisements for new sewing needles. You wonder if those faint letters brought a sense of the wider world to whoever slept beneath them. A journal fragment from a traveling tinker mentions that some families used animal hides instead of cloth. Bear or deer skins were stretched and softened with tallow, their smell lingering long after curing. He wrote that a cabin with fur bedding was a den of survival, both wild and civilized at once. You picture that now? The mix of musk and smoke, the warmth rising thick and heavy. Experts continue to debate whether handmade quilts or furs provided better insulation. Some say the layered fabrics trapped body heat more efficiently, while others argue that nothing matched the natural warmth of hide. You decide that the best choice is whatever feels like comfort when the night comes. You work through the afternoon, sewing by the light that spills through your small window. The cabin smells of thread and faint smoke, the fire still humming quietly. Your fingers ache, but the rhythm of the needle steadies your thoughts. Each stitch feels like a connection to every pair of hands that ever worked through winter, stubborn and hopeful. When evening falls, you spread the finished blanket across your bed. It is heavy and uneven, a patchwork of history and invention. You press your hand to it and feel a faint warmth left from your labor. It looks humble, yet in its own way magnificent. You pull it around your shoulders, and the cabin feels softer instantly, its hard edges dimmed by comfort. Diaries from settlers often speak of how families gathered around fires wrapped in shared quilts, telling stories until sleep took them one by one. The quilts themselves became chronicles, each patch a reminder of a shirt worn by a father, a skirt sewn by a mother, a scrap from a child's sleeve. You think about that, about how warmth can carry memory in its threads. Outside, snow begins to fall again, fat flakes drifting slowly in the dim light. You sit near the fire, your new blanket draped around you, and listen to the world hush. The sound of burning wood mixes with the faint whisper of snow on the roof. You feel an odd peace settle over you, one that belongs neither to the past nor the present. You pull the blanket tighter and stretch out on your bed. The firelight paints soft shapes across the walls. The smell of pine and fabric fills the room. You think of all the people, known and forgotten, who once did this same thing curled up, listening to winter breathe against their walls, waiting for morning. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf calls. The sound is long and mournful but strangely beautiful. You do not feel fear, only connection. You are part of the same wilderness now, resting under the same stars, surrounded by the same cold. But unlike the wild things, you have fire, walls, and the gentle weight of a handmade blanket pressing warmth against your chest. Sleep comes quietly, like snow covering the ground. You drift off with the scent of smoke and fabric in your hair, dreaming of color and texture and the comfort of things built by human hands. The morning greets you with a brightness that almost hurts your eyes. Frost has crept across your small window again, tracing new, fragile constellations in the thin sheet of oiled paper. You sit up slowly, your breath forming clouds in the air, and reach toward the cold light that filters through. It is strange how something so beautiful can also be a reminder of how fragile warmth truly is. The fire has faded to a faint glow, and your hands stiffen as you stir the ashes, coaxing life back into the coals. Light, you realize, is a luxury. Every ray that slips into your cabin feels borrowed. A good window can make winter survivable, but only if it does not steal away the heat you fought to keep. You walk toward your small window opening, touch the edges, and feel the chill seeping through. The oiled paper rustles softly, translucent and amber in the light. It does not let in much of the outside world, but it gives you enough a reminder that day still exists beyond your wooden walls. Accounts from early settlers describe the struggle to balance light and warmth. Glass was expensive, fragile, and rare in the far territories. Many cabins had no windows at all, only shutters that were opened briefly during the day and sealed again before dusk. Some used thin animal hide, stretched tight and rubbed with oil or fat until it became translucent. Others relied on parchment, or even flattened horns scraped thin as parchment. You imagine the dim glow of such makeshift windows, the way the light would quiver like candle flame against the walls. There is a mention in one traveler's diary of using mica as a window substitute in certain regions where the mineral was abundant. Thin sheets of it could be pried from rock, polished, and fitted into frames. It shimmered like frozen sunlight, fragile but surprisingly warm to the touch. He wrote that the cabins of those hills shone with their own quiet light. You picture that image now and feel a pang of envy. Archaeological studies of frontier dwellings suggest that many homes relied on just one small window, sometimes no larger than a man's hand, placed on the south wall to capture whatever warmth the sun offered. Builders learned from experience that even a single hole for light could become an invitation for frost. You find yourself debating where you might cut a second opening, weighing the need for brightness against the memory of last night's cold. You decide to leave the window as it is and instead improve what you already have. You mix a small batch of clay and moss, pressing it around the frame to block the drafts. Your fingers sting from the chill, but the task feels almost meditative. The smell of damp earth fills the cabin again, grounding you in the rhythm of maintenance that defines this life. A letter from an early settler woman describes how she would sit by her small window every morning to read her Bible by the weak light, wrapping herself in a shawl as frost gathered on the inside of the glass. She wrote that she loved those moments, that the light felt more sacred for being so rare. You understand her sentiment now, the quiet gratitude for something simple yet vital. Another record tells of children who decorated their oiled paper windows with soot drawings, tracing trees, stars, or crude faces on the thin surface. The images would blur when the frost melted and reform again by nightfall, living art that changed with the weather. You smile at the thought of such small acts of joy in a world so harsh. There is still disagreement among historians about how effective these makeshift windows really were. Some say they trapped heat surprisingly well. Others believe they were little more than symbolic, a gesture towards civilization. You do not need an argument to know their worth. The light that touches your cabin each morning feels like a reminder that you belong to something larger than the snow. You sit beside the window now, watching the day unfold through its hazy pane. The forest outside is still and bright. The snow sparkles where the sunlight hits it, turning the ground into a shifting mirror. For a moment, the world feels entirely silent, as if holding its breath along with you. The air inside the cabin warms gradually as the fire grows stronger. You notice how the light bends through the paper, tinting the room in honey tones. The imperfections in the material cast faint shadows, like fingerprints left by time. You think of all the hands that once worked to make windows just like this. Hands that rubbed oil into hides, polished mica, or stretched cloth tight across wooden frames. The effort was always the same, a search for connection with the outside world without letting it in completely. Later in the day, you step outside to clear the snow from around the cabin walls. The sunlight feels sharp, but pleasant on your face. You turn and look back at your home. The window glows faintly, a small square of warmth in the frozen landscape. It looks fragile, yet proud. You find yourself strangely moved by it, as if it were an eye through which the house itself watches the world. Evening returns quickly. You light a candle and set it near the window, curious to see how it looks from outside. When you step back into the snow, the sight surprises you. The light inside your cabin flickers through the paper pane, soft and golden, glowing like a lantern in the endless white. It feels human, intimate, alive. You imagine travelers passing through the forest, catching sight of that faint light and knowing that someone is inside, warm and safe. Back indoors, you draw your blanket around your shoulders and sit again by the window. The candle flame trembles against the chill air, and the shadows of snowflakes drift across the pane. You can hear the faint hiss of the wind against the roof and the slow crackle of the fire. Everything feels still, contained within this small, glowing room. Before you lie down, you run your fingertips along the edge of the frame, tracing the seam you sealed earlier. It feels solid now, protected. The window will hold through another storm. You blow out the candle and let the darkness return, comforted by the knowledge that even in a world of ice and silence, you have found a way to let the light in. You wake to a soft groaning above your head. The sound is steady, deep, and almost musical. It takes you a moment to understand what it is. The roof is speaking. The snow piled high through the night, pressing down on the beams, settling into the wood's grain. You lie still for a moment, listening. It is not the threatening sound of collapse, but the slow sigh of weight, of wood meeting winter in an old conversation. You sit up and pull on your boots, their leather stiff with cold. The air smells faintly of smoke and pine tar. When you step outside, the brightness blinds you. The roof gleams under its heavy white blanket, edges drooping slightly but holding firm. Snow sparkles in the morning light, drifting off the eaves in tiny avalanches. You feel both awe and caution. Beauty here is never harmless. Roofs on the frontier were not chosen for style but survival. Builders used what the land offered: cedar shingles, pine planks, sod, or even bark stripped from nearby trees. Some families layered dried grass between boards for insulation, while others covered rafters with soil to keep the heat in. Each method carried its own risks. Wooden shingles leaked, sod roofs sprouted weeds in spring, and bark curled in the heat of summer. Yet every roof held one promise: it would endure the storm. An old settler's notebook from 1829 mentions the sound of snow sliding off a sod roof as a lullaby for the weary. He described nights when the wind howled and the roof moaned but stayed strong above his sleeping family. You think about that phrase, lullaby for the weary, as you watch the flakes drift down. The roof's voice is not threatening at all, it is reassurance, a slow rhythm of protection. You notice a thin gap along one edge where the wind slips through. Grabbing a bundle of dried moss and clay, you climb up carefully, the cold biting through your gloves. From above, the world looks endless, white and silent. The roof's pitch is shallow, built to catch snow instead of letting it slide away. In many regions, that was intentional. Settlers learned that a thick layer of snow could act as insulation, holding warmth inside like a soft, icy blanket. The idea feels contradictory, yet nature often hides its kindness in paradox. A curious observation recorded by a trapper in the Northern Territories claims that roofs with bird nests wedged in their corners stayed warmer. He believed the packed twigs created natural air pockets. Modern researchers think he might have been right, though no one can prove it. You imagine small sparrows fluttering near your rafters in spring, sharing your shelter in their own secret way. When you climb down, your hands are numb, your sleeves dusted white. You step back to admire the cabin. The roofline is uneven but solid, edges trimmed with icicles that glitter in the weak sunlight. You realize that every structure on the frontier was a conversation between strength and surrender. Too rigid, and the house would crack. Too loose, and it would collapse. Somewhere in between lies survival. You return inside and feed the fire. The warmth spreads slowly upward, and droplets begin to fall from the ceiling as the snow melts just enough to breathe. The sound is soft, like the ticking of a clock you cannot see. You wipe the damp spots with a rag, amused that even a leaking roof feels like progress. A traveler's letter from 1842 recalls how families sometimes hung strips of cloth from their ceilings to catch melting snow. The water would drip into buckets placed strategically on the floor. He wrote that children used to race each other to empty the buckets, laughing at the absurdity of the chore. You can almost hear that laughter now, echoing faintly against your empty walls. Historians have long discussed whether settlers built their roofs too low. Some argue that low ceilings trapped heat better, while others claim they caused more smoke and dampness. Looking at your own cabin, you suspect both are true. The air feels warm near the floor but hazy near the rafters. Comfort always asks for compromise. By midday, the storm has passed. You step outside again, your boots sinking deep into snow. The forest sparkles, branches heavy and drooping, the world muffled to near silence. You stand there, watching your chimney send up a lazy spiral of smoke. It twists into the blue sky, carrying your labor's scent into the wilderness. The sight fills you with quiet pride. Somewhere between exhaustion and contentment, you start to hum a tune you barely remember. When you return inside, you feel the change instantly. The cabin no longer feels fragile. The roof, the walls, the fire, all of it holds together in balance. The sound of melting snow on the roof becomes a rhythm of reassurance, a steady heartbeat reminding you that life continues even under pressure. Before night falls, you add a few more logs to the fire and sit near the hearth. The shadows move across the ceiling, playing on the uneven planks above you. You think of the countless roofs across the frontier that have weathered centuries of storms. Each one carried the same hope, the same exhaustion, the same sound of snow sliding away. The light fades slowly, turning the window pale blue. Outside, the temperature drops again, but the roof remains steady. You listen to its faint creaks and sighs, each one a promise that it will hold through another night. You lie down on your bed, the fire still murmuring softly beside you. The warmth of the room feels earned, the kind that seeps deeper because it has been fought for. Above you, the roof whispers once more, a tired guardian humming to itself. You close your eyes and let its music carry you towards sleep, the steady rhythm of snow and wood merging into the sound of rest. When morning breaks, the cabin is full of scent, not the sweet smell of bread or fresh-cut flowers, but something more primal. Smoke, sap, damp wood, and faint traces of char. It clings to your clothes, to your skin, to the air itself. You breathe it in and realize this is what home smells like on the frontier, a mix of creation and survival. You sit near the hearth, rubbing warmth into your hands. The smoke curls lazily upward, tracing the patterns of the ceiling. It is a living thing, shifting and whispering, filling the space between silence and sound. For the first time, you notice how much your body has come to rely on this scent. It tells you the fire is alive, that life itself continues in this small wooden world. Travel diaries from the 19th century often mention the same smell. Some writers called it the perfume of civilization. They claimed that after a week of open plains, catching the faintest whiff of wood smoke meant safety, food, and human presence. Others complained bitterly, saying the odor never left their clothes, that even in spring, their coats carried the ghost of winter's fires. Both were true. Smoke was both blessing and burden. You open the door slightly, letting in a thin stripe of cold air. The draft clears the haze, but the warmth wavers. Ventilation is tricky. Too little, and you cough until your eyes sting. Too much, and the fire sulks, smothered by frost. You understand now why every old cabin was built with tiny gaps between roof and wall, the kind you once cursed while chinking. They were not mistakes. They were lungs. A note from an early surveyor describes how indigenous builders taught settlers to position their dwellings to align with prevailing winds. The wind would draw smoke out of the chimney more efficiently, keeping the air inside breathable. He admitted most newcomers ignored the advice until they nearly choked themselves each winter. You think of that as you shift the door again, feeling the balance between air and warmth, between knowledge and stubbornness. There are still debates among restoration experts about how smoky those cabins truly were. Some say the walls grew black within months, Others claim soot was minimal if the fire burned clean. Looking up at your own rafters, you see faint grey shadows already forming. The truth, you suspect, lies somewhere in between. A little smoke meant a little life. Too much meant death by your own fire. You add another log and watch the flames lick it eagerly. The cabin hums with quiet energy. You notice how the smoke drifts differently depending on the wood. Pine crackles bright and sharp, giving off a resinous bite. Oak burns slow and deep, its smoke dense but steady. Every tree carries its own personality into the hearth. A peculiar practice recorded in northern settlements involved hanging pine boughs near the roof beams. As they dried, their needles released a steady fragrance that masked the staleness of smoke. Some claimed it kept spirits away. Others said it simply made the air more pleasant. You decide to try it, hanging a few branches above your bed. Their scent fills the room instantly, sharp and comforting, like the breath of the forest itself. You think of how the human nose remembers smells more than words. The aroma of this place will never leave you. Years from now, even a faint hint of wood smoke will summon this cabin the cold mornings. The hiss of the fire, the sound of your own breathing in a world so quiet it feels suspended in time. By midday, the air grows thick again. You open the window flap for a moment, and a rush of icy wind slips inside. It smells clean, untouched, full of distance. The contrast is startling. You close your eyes and feel it move across your face. The cabin exhales with you, a deep sigh of relief. Letters from frontier women often describe the constant struggle to manage smoke. One writer recalled her husband carving a small vent hole above the door, covered with a flap of leather. She called it "our little miracle," saying it saved both their tempers and their lungs. You smile at the image, realizing how small solutions often carry the greatest peace. You close the flap again, leaving only a thread of air moving through the space. The fire steadies. The smell softens into something balanced warmth without suffocation, life without chaos. The pine branches sway gently in the rising heat, their scent blending with the faint sweetness of drying clay from the walls. Evening arrives slowly, dimming the room to amber and shadow. The smoke turns blue in the fading light, swirling above the fire like a ghost rehearsing its lines. You watch it drift upward, then vanish into the chimney, leaving the faintest trace behind. The cabin feels alive, breathing in rhythm with you. Before lying down, you glance once more at the ceiling, its edges traced with soft soot. You think of how every bit of smoke that passes through this space will eventually settle into the wood, marking time in a language older than words. Long after you are gone, these beams will still carry the scent of your nights here. You lie back, inhaling deeply. Smoke, pine, earth, and faint sweetness from the straw mattress blend into something almost musical. You realize that this too is comfort, not the absence of imperfection, but the presence of familiar air. The cabin whispers around you, quiet and breathing, the fire its heart, the smoke its spirit. Sleep drifts in easily, as if carried by the same invisible current rising toward the chimney. The scent of warmth lingers, threading through your dreams until even in sleep you feel surrounded by home. The snow outside glows pale and endless, a sheet of white pressed against the horizon. When you open the cabin door, the cold rushes in like an eager guest. It bites your cheeks and catches your breath, but you smile anyway. Today you are not building or patching. Today you are walking. You have neighbors now, or so you've heard. A family settled 2 valleys over, another group beyond the ridge. The first winter on the frontier taught everyone the same lesson. Survival prefers company. You pull your coat tight, wrap your scarf, and start along the narrow trail you trampled in the snow earlier in the week. The forest greets you in silence, its branches heavy with frost. Every sound feels louder here, the crunch under your boots, the distant call of a raven, the creak of your pack shifting on your shoulders. Letters from early settlers often describe these journeys to neighboring cabins as pilgrimages. The distance might only be a mile, but the terrain made it feel like crossing continents. People brought whatever they could spare: a loaf of bread, a strip of smoked meat, a jar of rendered fat, even a song or story to trade. You think about that as you walk, clutching a small bundle of dried herbs in your pocket, a gift for whoever answers the door. The path winds through tall pines. Your breath hangs in the air, drifting upward like incense. The quiet is so deep it hums inside your ears. Then, in the distance, a faint sound, someone chopping wood. It repeats steadily, a metronome of effort. You follow it, your pace quickening. The forest opens into a clearing, and there it is. Another cabin, smaller than yours, its chimney coughing out a thin line of smoke. A figure bends near a pile of logs, raising an axe again and again. You lift a hand and call out. The sound startles a bird from the roof, but the man turns, squints, and smiles. His beard is thick with frost, his breath steaming in the air. He waves you closer. Within minutes, you are by his fire, warming your hands on a cup of something that smells faintly of apples and smoke. His wife emerges from the doorway, cheeks pink from the heat of the hearth, and nods in greeting. She is wary but kind, the sort of kindness born from shared hardship. A journal from a trapper once described these early meetings as half relief, half caution. Every stranger could mean danger or salvation, yet most encounters ended the same way, with shared food and stories told beside the fire. The hunger for company was stronger than fear. You feel that hunger now as you talk, your words tumbling easily after so many days of silence. The couple tells you about the others scattered across the valley. There is a widow with two grown sons building a barn near the creek, and an old man who traps in the hills. In spring, they say, everyone gathers for a shared meal, each family bringing something from their small store. Sometimes they dance. You picture it: rough boots stamping on wooden floors, laughter rising above the smoke, the world thawing just enough for joy. A curious account from a missionary's diary mentions how these frontier gatherings mixed cultures freely. Settlers, trappers, and indigenous families traded songs and stories by the same fire. One record describes a night of shared music where no one understood the other's words, but everyone clapped in time. The writer called it a brief truce against the wind. The woman hands you a piece of bread thick with butter, and you taste the faint sweetness of survival. The fire crackles, its warmth wrapping you like a quilt. You listen to her talk about the storms, the way the wind howls down from the north and makes the roof tremble. She says sometimes she sings over the sound, just to remind herself that human voices still exist. You promise to visit again, to bring something for her children once the thaw begins. Historians often debate whether these early frontier communities were driven by necessity or genuine fellowship. Some claim people helped each other only when trade required it. Others insist the isolation made generosity instinctive. Watching this family move together, he tending the wood, she kneading dough, the faint murmur of children inside you feels certain that kindness was survival itself. As the afternoon light begins to fade, you rise to leave. The woman wraps a strip of cloth around your herbs, adding a small pouch of salt to your hand. She says it was once worth more than gold in these parts. You thank her and step back into the cold, the warmth of her fire lingering on your skin. The walk home feels easier. The snow crunches rhythmically beneath your boots. The forest seems less empty now, every distant wisp of smoke a reminder that other hearts are burning nearby. You imagine the map of fires stretching across the land, each small flame defying the endless cold. When your own cabin comes into view, you stop and turn once more toward the valley. Somewhere out there, laughter is echoing through another set of wooden walls. You feel part of something larger, something quietly magnificent. Inside, the familiar smell greets you: smoke, pine, and a hint of ash. You hang your coat by the door and stir the coals in your hearth. The fire leaps up, answering you like an old friend. You sit by it, unwrap the cloth the woman tied for you, and sprinkle a little salt into the flames. They spark briefly, hissing with life. For the first time, the cabin feels less like a fortress and more like a node in a network of human light. You are no longer just one person fighting the cold. You are part of a constellation of warmth, flickering across the wilderness, each spark whispering the same message into the frozen air. We are still here. You stretch out your hands to the fire and close your eyes. The world outside is cold, vast and wild, but it no longer feels empty. It feels alive, and you belong to it. Night comes early again, blue and quiet. The air outside freezes with a brittle edge, while the fire inside the cabin breathes in slow, glowing sighs. You tighten your new quilt around your shoulders and look toward the corner where the children would sleep if this place were full of family. It feels empty now, but the imagination fills what the world withholds. You can almost hear their laughter echoing faintly through the wooden walls. On the frontier, children were warmth in more ways than one. Diaries from settlers often describe the nightly ritual of tucking little ones beneath layers of patched quilts, sharing breath and body heat. In cabins with only one room, everyone slept close together. Babies were wrapped in shawls and laid near the hearth, while older children curled up beside each other like nesting birds. That closeness was less about affection and more about necessity, yet it created a tenderness that would be remembered long after the frost was gone. You stir the fire, and imagine those evenings. A mother humming softly while she mends socks, a father carving a small toy by firelight, a child whispering a story to delay sleep. The flickering shadows across the walls would become part of their dreams. You picture it so vividly that the silence around you feels full of ghosts. Letters from frontier families reveal how sleep was a communal act, not just rest but reassurance. One woman wrote that she could not fall asleep until she heard the slow breathing of every person under her roof. That rhythm, she said, was her prayer. You think of that phrase, the prayer of breathing, and it lodges somewhere deep in your chest. Even when warmth was scarce, imagination supplied what the body lacked. A few records describe families heating stones in the fire, wrapping them in cloth, and placing them at the foot of the bed to keep the children's toes warm. Others tucked baked potatoes under the covers, to be eaten cold the next morning. It was practical magic, the kind that turned dinner into comfort and comfort into memory. You rise and walk to the hearth, stirring the embers again. The coals shift and glow, sending up thin ribbons of smoke that curl toward the roof. The fire's glow reminds you of the stories told to keep fear away. Frontier parents often softened the edge of winter with tales about foxes that guided lost travelers, about stars that followed good-hearted wanderers home. Some stories were borrowed from older traditions, some invented out of necessity, but all of them carried the same quiet message. The world is vast, and you are small, but you are not alone. You remember reading once about a child's diary from the 1860 seconds, kept through one of the hardest winters on record. The girl wrote about her father reading aloud each night from a single book they owned, his voice soft, the words fading as the fire dimmed. She said the pages smelled of wood smoke and hope. Historians still study that diary for its glimpse into ordinary resilience, but what you recall most is that line about the smell of pages. It feels universal now, even here. The fire snaps sharply, bringing you back to the present. You kneel and adjust the logs, then carry your blanket and sit near the wall. The cabin hums with quiet contentment. The air is thick with the scent of pine and the faint sweetness of straw. You can almost believe that children's laughter still lingers in the corners, that unseen lives once filled this same space. You think about how people measured wealth differently then, not in coin, but in quilts, shared meals, and sleeping bodies. Warmth itself was a kind of currency. When a family welcomed guests, they gave them the warmest spot near the fire or the thickest blanket they owned. Hospitality was survival, and kindness was insurance. Some anthropologists studying early settlements suggest that those cramped nights of shared sleep built a kind of unspoken empathy among families. When you spend winter pressed shoulder to shoulder, you learn the rhythms of another heartbeat, the weight of trust. It is a theory that makes sense to you now, Sitting alone with your fire, solitude keeps you safe, but it also reminds you of everything warmth truly means. The night outside deepens. The sound of the wind slipping past the chimney mixes with the soft crackling of the fire. You close your eyes and picture the interior of another cabin, not far from yours. A family huddled close, quilts layered thick, a dog curled at their feet. The faint murmur of a lullaby rises and falls, blending with the wind until it becomes part of it. A traveler once wrote that frontier children grew up knowing how to read the world by sound. They could tell whether a log was burning too fast by the pitch of its crackle, whether snow was fresh or crusted by the way their boots broke through it, whether their parents were calm or worried by the silence in the room. Those children carried that sensitivity all their lives, shaped by seasons that spoke in whispers instead of words. You lie down again and pull your blanket up to your chin. The bed creaks softly, echoing the rhythm of the fire. The air feels heavy with stillness, the kind that precedes snow. You think of all those families across time, all those small hearts beating together in wooden rooms, finding warmth in shared breath. You close your eyes and imagine a small hand slipping into yours, the phantom touch of generations long gone but never forgotten. The fire fades to a red glow, and the cabin breathes around you. Sleep takes hold gently, as if someone is still keeping watch beside you. The storm arrives before dawn, shaking the cabin as if the wind itself wants to come inside. You wake to the sound of snow slapping against the walls, an erratic rhythm that fills the silence with movement. The air feels sharper than usual, the kind of cold that slides into your lungs and settles there. You feed the fire quickly, kneeling close as the flames stretch upward in answer. The warmth comes slow but steady, blooming across your hands and face like a sunrise inside the dark. The first thing you notice is the noise. The wind hums through the chimney, finding every small crack, every imperfect seam. It wails, then softens, then rises again with new determination. You sit beside the hearth and listen. The sound strange yet hypnotic. Some nights, the wind feels cruel. Tonight, it feels almost alive, like an old creature testing the walls to see what you are made of. Accounts from early homesteads describe this same music. People wrote about the blizzards that came suddenly, turning day into dusk and burying the world in white silence. One man said the wind could mimic voices, calling his name through the gaps in the logs until he almost answered. Another woman claimed she heard laughter carried in the gusts, soft and eerie, the sound of lost travelers or maybe of the forest itself speaking. You think of that as the storm presses against your walls, and you shiver despite the heat. You wrap your quilt tighter and light a candle near the window. The flame flickers wildly in the draught. Through the oiled paper, you can see nothing but swirling white, the sky and the earth blending together. You wonder how many families once sat just like this, staring at the same colorless horizon, praying the roof would hold. A line from a settler's journal comes to mind. The storm is loudest when it has nowhere to go. You nod softly to yourself. The wind does not hate you. It simply needs to move, to express its power against something solid. Tonight, that something is you. You brew a small pot of tea from dried mint and pine needles, their scent sharp and medicinal. Steam curls upward, mingling with the smoke from the fire. You sip slowly, each swallow pushing the cold a little farther away. The flavor is bitter, but it feels alive. The cup warms your palms, and your heart steadies in rhythm with the wind's endless rise and fall. Some records describe how humor became a survival tool during long storms. Families told jokes to drown out the noise, sang loudly, even shouted nonsense into the wind just to feel stronger than it. One letter from a pioneer father recounts his children standing by the window, yelling challenges to the storm as if daring it to come inside. You can almost see their faces lit by firelight, eyes bright with courage disguised as play. There is still disagreement among scholars about the psychological toll of such winters. Some argue that isolation bred melancholy, while others say it forged resilience, unmatched in later generations. Reading their words is one thing, but living it now, You feel both possibilities twisting inside you. The storm reminds you of your smallness, but also of your endurance. The hours stretch. You add more wood to the fire, the flames leaping greedily. The sound of crackling fills the room, a warm counterpoint to the wind's howl. Occasionally, snow slips from the roof with a heavy sigh, thudding against the frozen ground. Each sound reassures you that the cabin still holds. You whisper a quiet thank you to the roof, the walls, the fire, your fragile kingdom of warmth in a world made of ice. A curious tale recorded by travelers speaks of people who claim to predict storms by listening to the pitch of the wind against their chimneys. Low tones meant short tempests, while high, whistling notes foretold long ones. You tilt your head, listening to the shifting sound above. The pitch wavers, uncertain, as if the storm cannot decide how long to stay. You take comfort in that ambiguity. By afternoon, the storm softens. The light filtering through the paper window shifts from grey to pale gold. You push open the door, just enough to peer outside. The snowdrifts rise halfway up the walls, smooth and glistening, sculpted by the wind into gentle waves. The forest beyond stands still, its branches heavy and glittering. The silence that follows is not emptiness but peace, a kind of reverent hush. You breathe deeply, the cold air burning your throat. The storm has passed, leaving the world reshaped but intact. Inside, the fire still burns strong, its crackle like laughter after fear. You close the door and lean against it, smiling at the thought of how fragile you are and yet how stubbornly you remain. Letters from survivors of long winters often mention this feeling, the mix of exhaustion and triumph that follows a storm. One woman wrote that the silence afterward was the sweetest sound on earth. You understand her now. The quiet carries gratitude, not emptiness. You sit again by the fire, watching the last flakes drift lazily past your window. The cabin smells of smoke and pine. The candle burns low, and your body feels heavy but content. The world outside has tested you and found you steady. As night comes, you add one last log to the hearth and lie back on your bed. The quilt is warm, the air calm, the sound of the storm already fading into memory. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of the fire lull you, the echo of the wind now softened to a whisper. For the first time in days, sleep comes easily, carrying you through the stillness left behind by the storm's passing. When you open your eyes, the world is quiet again. The storm has left behind a brightness so pure it almost hurts to look at. The snow outside the window glows like crushed glass in the morning light, and the air feels new, scrubbed clean by wind and ice. You sit up, stretch your arms toward the low ceiling, and listen. Somewhere beneath the silence, you hear the faint creak of the cabin adjusting to the cold. You rise, light the fire, and wait for the warmth to find you. The flames take easily now, the wood dry and eager. You feed it slowly, enjoying the soft rhythm of crackling. The light flickers across the floorboards, painting them in hues of orange and gold. You move through the cabin, straightening what little you own, shaking the straw in your bed, brushing frost from the window frame. The morning feels calm, yet you sense a kind of expectancy in the air. The long nights of winter brought not only rest but a strange kind of productivity. Diaries from frontier families tell how the dark hours became the time for quiet work, mending tools, spinning thread, sewing, carving, and repairing anything broken before spring. You feel that same impulse now, to fill the silence with the small, careful movements of creation. You find a block of soft wood near the hearth and begin to carve. Your knife glides easily at first, then hesitates as the grain changes direction. The sound of blade against wood is rhythmic, soothing. Soon the shape begins to emerge, not perfect, but something recognizable, perhaps a spoon, or maybe a simple figurine. The act matters more than the result. The cabin fills with the faint, sweet scent of shaved pine. A diary entry from a homesteader in 1851 mentions this same practice. He wrote that his wife and daughters spent each winter evening sewing by candlelight while he carved small toys for the children. It kept the dark away, he wrote. You understand that now. Creation, no matter how humble, keeps despair from taking root. The candle you light at your table flickers gently, casting shadows that dance across your unfinished carving. Its light feels softer than firelight, more personal. Candles on the frontier were precious, made from tallow or beeswax when supplies allowed. People poured them by hand, dipping wicks repeatedly until they thickened, then cooling them along windowsills. The smell of hot fat filled every home, harsh but strangely comforting. In one preserved letter from an early settler woman, she confessed to saving bits of leftover candle stubs through winter, melting them all together on New Year's Day to make what she called the hope candle. It was burned only when someone in the family was sick or when spirits felt low. She said the flame reminded them that even scraps could be made whole again. You find that idea beautiful and tuck it quietly into your thoughts. There are historians who argue that this winter craftwork helped shape the social fabric of entire communities. When the sun set at 4 and rose at 8, families found meaning in these rituals of making. The small tasks gave structure to endless nights. A home filled with the sounds of sewing, scraping, or hammering was a home alive with intention. You carve through the morning, pausing now and then to sip hot broth. The steam fogs your vision, and the air smells of wood and salt. The fire pops gently in the corner, like laughter held at a distance. You lose track of time, your mind quieting into the rhythm of the blade and the soft rasp of wood falling away. In the corner of your eye, you notice how the light from the window has changed. It filters in at an angle now, cool and silver, mixing with the amber glow of the fire. The two lights merge, painting your cabin in a strange balance of warmth and chill. You set down your carving and watch the shadows drift slowly across the floor. A curious note found in the records of an old trading post mentions how settlers used to predict the end of winter by observing how candles burned. If the flame flickered too much, it meant more storms were coming. If it burned steady, they believed spring was near. You study your own candle now, its flame calm and unwavering, and allow yourself a quiet smile. As evening arrives, you finish your small carving a spoon, simple and uneven, but useful. You turn it in your hand, feeling the smoothness of the handle, the slight imperfections that give it character. It is not art, but it is something made by your hands, born from stillness and firelight. You lay it on the table and stare at it as if it holds a secret. You light another candle before night fully takes the room. Its glow fills the corners, soft and reassuring. You think of all those who once worked like this. Mothers sewing torn sleeves, fathers sharpening tools, children patching blankets with clumsy stitches. Each task was a conversation with the dark, a quiet assertion that life would continue. When you finally lie down, the room feels different. The work has changed it somehow, filled it with invisible traces of care. The carved spoon rests on the table beside the fire, catching the last flicker of light before the embers fade. You close your eyes, the faint smell of wood shavings lingering in the air. In the distance, the wind returns, gentle now, moving softly through the trees. You breathe in time with its rhythm, feeling your heartbeat slow, your mind sink into stillness. Tomorrow will bring more work, more small labors to fill the hours. But for now, in the quiet glow of your candle's last light, you drift into sleep surrounded by the simple beauty of creation and calm. The world outside your window is a white hush, snow still clinging to every branch as if afraid to fall. Inside, the air is calm and warmer than usual. You sit by the fire, a cup of hot water in your hands, and watch the way the smoke twists before slipping up through the chimney. The cabin has learned your rhythm by now, or perhaps you have learned its. Every sound seems to arrive on cue: the crackle of wood, the sigh of the wind, the creak of settling logs. As the days blend together, you begin to notice something deeper than routine. There is a quiet logic to how heat moves, how warmth behaves like a living thing. When you open the door, it rushes out greedily, seeking balance. When you close it again, it lingers low to the ground, rising only when coaxed by flame or motion. You study this invisible dance, curious without realizing that you are watching science unfold in its simplest form. Records from early builders show they understood much of this long before anyone explained it with numbers. They spoke of how thick logs held heat better than thin planks, how a stone hearth continued to warm the room long after the fire had died. They knew without theory that smaller rooms stayed warmer, and that ceilings too high made a house feel like a cold church. You smile at the thought that wisdom often comes before knowledge. You test it yourself. After feeding the fire, you press your palm against the wall. The surface is warm, where the light from the flames reaches it, cooler toward the corners. You begin to understand how the wood stores the day's energy, releasing it back in the quiet hours of night. Each log becomes a slow, breathing reservoir of comfort. One diary from a Norwegian settler describes how he arranged stones under his floor to trap heat from the fire. Each night, he let the embers die and the stones release their stored warmth upward, keeping the cabin mild until morning. Archaeologists later found traces of such methods in old ruins and called it primitive engineering, but you prefer to think of it as clever kindness. You experiment with your own version. Near the hearth, you gather several large stones and place them around the base of the fire. They hiss as the moisture leaves them, then settle into a steady, gentle glow. When you touch them later, the heat pulses through your fingers. You roll one near your bed, and it feels like holding a small, sleeping animal. There is an old superstition mentioned in travelers' journals that warmth carried from one fire to another brought luck, but stealing coals invited misfortune. Villagers in Europe once shared embers carefully, wrapping them in cloth, whispering gratitude before passing them along. You think about that as you move the glowing stones, and you whisper your own quiet thanks. Gratitude, you decide, is a kind of insulation too. Some modern researchers argue that early settlers understood heat as a presence rather than a measurement. They spoke of it almost like spirit, something that could be invited, respected, or offended. That belief shaped how they built, how they slept, even how they spoke near the fire. You realize now that you talk to your fire more than you talk to yourself. It listens better, after all. You notice patterns. The fire breathes best when fed with small, dry pieces of wood rather than large logs. It prefers steady attention over bursts of generosity. If you neglect it, it sulks, retreating to smoke. If you rush it, it rebels, throwing sparks like sharp words. Patience makes it flourish. As you sit, you catch the faint scent of something sweet. It takes a moment to realize it is the sap boiling inside the burning pine. It perfumes the air with a quiet reminder that warmth always costs something. Every comfort, every bright flame, comes from transformation. A letter from an explorer to his brother described wintering in a mountain hut, where he observed how different kinds of wood gave distinct warmth. Birch flared quick and light, oak burned slow and deep, willow barely held a spark but filled the air with fragrance. He wrote that a house that smelled of willow felt kinder, even when colder. You breathe deeply, testing your own air, and wonder what your house smells like to the wind outside. Later in the day, you open the door to let fresh air sweep through. The warmth escapes instantly, a reminder of how fragile comfort is. Yet when you close it again, the new air feels lively, cleaner, almost grateful. You think of how even stillness needs renewal, how every living space must inhale and exhale, just like the body that inhabits it. The light fades quickly. You set another log in the fire, watch it catch, and marvel again at how flame always seeks upward, how heat always rises, how something invisible carries energy from one body to another. You know the words for it now: convection, conduction, but those labels feel unnecessary. The truth is simpler. Warmth moves because life does. Before you sleep, you touch the nearest wall again. The wood is warm where the firelight touches it. You press your cheek to it, eyes closed, and listen. The faint hum of stored heat feels almost like a heartbeat, steady and enduring. For a moment, you imagine the cabin breathing beside you, both of you alive through cooperation and care. You settle into bed, the air thick with the scent of pine resin and ash. The stones near your feet still glow faintly, radiating the memory of flame. You think about how heat, once released, does not vanish but travels, changing form, finding new places to rest. That thought soothes you more than the warmth itself. Outside, the wind is quiet again. Inside, the last light from the fire flickers against the walls, tracing patterns that seem to move even after you close your eyes. You drift to sleep slowly, your thoughts carried by invisible waves of warmth, the unseen science of survival whispering you toward dreams. The morning light creeps through your paper window in a faint golden wash. The air feels still and heavy, filled with the scent of yesterday's fire. You rise, stretch your arms toward the low rafters, and listen to the slow cracking of the wood as it shifts in the cold. Your breath fogs slightly in the air. You realize that even though you have warmth, you will need more than logs and walls to last through what remains of winter. You need supplies, and on the frontier, that means trading. You pack a small bundle, dried meat, a strip of fur, a few of your wooden spoons, and a small pouch of salt from your neighbor. Each item has value not in gold, but in usefulness. In a world this raw, everything is worth something if it can help someone stay alive another week. You fasten your coat, pull your scarf high, and step outside into the cold light. The sky is the color of pewter, thick and silent, promising snow again by nightfall. The nearest settlement is half a day's walk away, a cluster of cabins and tents along a frozen stream. You follow the trail that winds through pine trees and open drifts. The sound of your boots crunching in the snow becomes a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Every so often, you spot faint signs of life, rabbit tracks near a stump, the distant echo of an axe striking wood. You remember reading that early frontier travelers learned to judge distance not by miles, but by the time it took for an echo to fade. The quieter the echo, the closer the next soul. By midday, you see smoke curling into the pale sky. As you approach, the scent of cooking fat and damp wool greets you. The trading post is simple, a long cabin with a slanted roof, its door hanging slightly crooked. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of leather, tobacco, and coffee. Voices murmur softly, rough and tired, but familiar in their humanity. One record from a trader's ledger describes this exact kind of place. He wrote that on storm days, people arrived from 10 miles away just to stand near other voices. Even if no goods were exchanged, the talk itself was a kind of trade. You feel that truth immediately as you nod to the handful of faces inside, each one half hidden behind scarves and hats. Behind the counter stands a man with graying hair and bright eyes. He greets you with the simple warmth of someone who has learned that politeness costs nothing and can sometimes save a life. You set your bundle on the counter, and he begins to examine your goods. The fur catches his interest first, then the spoons. He runs a thumb along the smooth wood, smiles slightly, and offers you a small sack of dried beans in return. In an old journal from a trapper's wife, she described trade as a conversation of needs. You give what you can spare, and in return you receive what another cannot live without. No one grows rich from it, but everyone survives. That same quiet philosophy guides this moment. You leave with your sack of beans, a small roll of wool, and a tin of oil for your lamp. You add a few kind words to the exchange, as much a part of the bargain as anything tangible. Near the fire at the center of the room, a few people sit warming their hands. One hums a tune you almost recognize, a slow song with no clear beginning. Someone else joins softly, their voice low and cracked from the cold. The melody drifts through the room, tender and human. It reminds you that warmth can be shared through sound as easily as through fire. A curious entry in an explorer's diary tells how some remote settlements used music as a kind of social currency. People traded songs, verses, or riddles in the same way they traded salt and grain. A new song could travel farther and faster than any wagon, carrying pieces of one winter's hope to another. You wish you knew a song to give in return, but instead you listen, nodding in time, letting the sound settle inside you. Before leaving, you stop at a small corner table where a woman sells candles she has dipped herself. The smell of tallow and wax fills the air. You trade her a few spoonfuls of your herbs for one candle wrapped in paper. She tells you that she mixes the wax with honey to make the light burn steady. Her hands are red from work, yet her smile is gentle. Historians often debate whether these trading posts were outposts of civilization or merely extensions of survival. Some say they were lifelines, bringing connection to the wild. Others argue they were only temporary, a fragile bridge between isolation and decay. Standing here, surrounded by the smell of smoke and humanity, you decide they were both. The frontier was never tidy. It was a balancing act between endurance and hope. By late afternoon, the light outside begins to dim. You tighten your coat and head home, following your own tracks back through the forest. The wind has shifted, carrying the faint scent of snow again. The trees sway gently, their branches whispering against each other. You walk faster, your small bundle heavier with food but lighter with gratitude. When your cabin finally comes into view, the sight fills you with relief. Smoke curls lazily from the chimney, proof that your hearth still breathes. Inside, you hang your coat, light your new candle, and pour a handful of beans into the pot. The scent of cooking fills the room, simple and nourishing. As the fire crackles, you think about the faces you saw, the songs you heard, and the small exchanges that knit lives together across the cold. Trading, you realize, is not just barter. It is the heartbeat of community. You sit near the fire, spoon in hand, and eat slowly, letting each bite warm you from the inside out. Outside, snow begins to fall again, but this time, you feel no fear of it. You have food, warmth, and the memory of voices that remind you you are not alone. The storm can come as it pleases. Inside this cabin, the light will last the night. By dawn, the snow has deepened again, softening every shape outside your door until the world looks like a single, unbroken sheet of white. The air feels sharper than it has in weeks, and even inside the cabin, the cold creeps along the floor, wrapping around your ankles like mist. You throw another log onto the fire, watch the sparks leap upward, and know that winter still has lessons left to teach. You wake slower than usual, your joints protesting, your breath coming in clouds. The thought of frostbite crosses your mind, and you flex your fingers, grateful for the blood that still moves. For most frontier families, frostbite was not a distant threat but a familiar companion. It came silently, often during chores or travel, when the air turned against the skin. Diaries from the era describe it without drama, as if it were just another tax the cold demanded. You remember one particular account written by a trapper who spent a winter alone in the mountains. He told of waking to find the tips of his fingers white and senseless. He held them near the fire too quickly, and the sudden heat burned more than it healed. He wrote, "The pain was proof that I was still mine." You think of that phrase now, running your thumb along the seam of your mitten, and it feels heavier than any medical advice? For those who could not rely on science, survival depended on stories, on fragments of inherited wisdom. Some swore by rubbing snow into the frozen skin to wake it again, a trick that likely did more harm than good. Others carried small bottles of whiskey, believing a drink could thaw the blood, though it often did the opposite. Remedies drifted between folklore and desperation. A curious belief preserved in several letters mentions that hanging iron tools above the bed protected sleepers from frost creeping into their limbs. The logic was simple enough. Iron, cold and unyielding, might confuse the spirit of winter. Whether superstition or comfort, many followed it faithfully. You glance toward your own axe, resting near the hearth, and decide that perhaps a little superstition never hurt anyone. Historians studying frontier medicine often note how knowledge moved through rumor rather than books. Recipes for ointments, poultices, and charms were passed like secret messages. One recipe mixed bear grease with beeswax to protect exposed skin. Another combined ash and vinegar into a salve for cracked lips. Most were half effective at best, but they carried a sense of agency. Doing something, anything mattered more than the result. You look around your small cabin and think about how people face sickness and injury in isolation. No doctors nearby, no hospitals, only the steady hum of human instinct. Sometimes they trusted herbs, sometimes prayers, often both. That dual faith in body and spirit shaped how they lived through winters that might have crushed less stubborn hearts. A book of early homestead lore recounts a strange ritual for warding off winter illness. Families would burn dried sage mixed with a handful of salt while reciting a simple phrase of protection. The smoke, it was said, carried warmth to the bones. You decide to try it, mostly for curiosity. The smell fills the room quickly, sharp and cleansing. The smoke rises and twists through the beams before disappearing up the chimney. Whether it brings protection or not, it smells like defiance. As the day unfolds, you gather what you can to mend your gloves and boots. The fire hums quietly behind you. You stitch the worn seams carefully, fingers stiff but precise. Every motion feels like an act of patience. You know that staying warm is not just about firewood or shelter, but attention to detail, to the small tasks that keep life from unraveling. A passage from a missionary's letter tells of indigenous healers teaching settlers how to rub animal fat into cracked leather to keep it supple in the cold. The same grease was used to soften skin and prevent frostbite. He wrote that the settlers were skeptical at first, then converted by the evidence of comfort. You smile at that, realizing how wisdom has a way of crossing boundaries when survival is at stake. You pause to warm your hands by the fire. The room glows faintly orange, and you catch your reflection in the window's sheen, a figure wrapped in shadow and smoke. You look older than you feel, but there is pride in that face. Each line is a map of choices, of nights endured. Outside, the snow keeps falling, soft but endless. You step to the door, open it just enough to feel the air against your face. It is biting cold, yet strangely beautiful. The forest stands silent under its new coat, the branches heavy but graceful. The light has a metallic quality, pure and distant. There is a story told in some frontier settlements that frost itself was alive, a trickster spirit that traveled at night painting the world in white. Children were warned not to leave offerings outside, or the spirit would become greedy. The same act could be fear or gratitude, depending on who told it. You decide to leave a crumb near the door anyway, unsure whether to ward off mischief or invite grace. Evening comes softly, the snow muffling every sound. Inside, the fire grows bright again, the smell of sage still lingering faintly in the air. You sit near it, rubbing your hands together, and think of the countless lives that met the same cold and refused to bow to it. You lie down, tucking your blanket close, your body tired but peaceful. The frost creeps across the window pane, drawing its delicate patterns, and the firelight flickers gently against them. You watch until your eyes grow heavy. The cold will always return, but so will the warmth. Between the two, you find balance, the oldest medicine of all. The days have grown a little longer, though the cold has not yet eased. When you step outside in the morning, the sunlight feels thin and far away, but it stays a few minutes longer each day. The snow near the walls has crusted into glittering ridges, and the sound of dripping water tells you the thaw is coming, slowly and reluctantly. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The world is still frozen, but something in the air has shifted. Inside, the cabin smells of smoke, dried herbs, and wood sap. It feels lived in now, softened by time. Every surface carries a trace of your hands. You run your palm along the rough logs and realize that this space, once just a collection of materials, has become part of you. A home, even one made of pine and clay, is more than a structure. It is a memory shaped into wood. When frontier families reached this point in their first winter, they began to make their cabins into homes. The practical tasks never ended, but the focus shifted. They started adding touches of comfort curtains from old shirts, shelves for keepsakes, or carved initials above the door. Letters from settlers describe how the walls themselves began to tell stories, each nail or patch of chinking tied to a specific day or mood. You decide to do the same. From a leftover scrap of cloth, you fashion a small curtain for your window. The color is faded brown, but when you hang it, the fabric softens the light. The cabin glows in a gentler hue. The change is small, but the effect is astonishing. It feels as though you have invited warmth that is not only physical but emotional. An old homestead journal tells of a woman who pressed wildflowers between the cracks of her log walls each summer. By winter, the petals turned brittle and pale, but she kept them there as reminders that beauty still existed outside the snow. Her neighbors thought it strange, yet she said it made her feel less lonely when the nights stretched too long. You understand that impulse now, the need to hold something living, even in memory. You look around for your own token of color. A pine cone, perfectly shaped, catches your eye. You set it on the shelf beside the carved spoon you made weeks ago. The two objects together make the cabin look less like a workshop and more like a story in progress. There are scholars who argue that coziness, what some languages call hygge, or hearth peace, is not an invention of luxury, but of endurance. The more the outside world threatened, the more people found solace in order, light, and familiar textures. On the frontier, comfort was rebellion. Every quilt, every candle, every curtain was a quiet act of defiance against the wilderness. You begin to add more small details. A smooth stone on the windowsill, a bundle of dried sage hung near the door, a simple line of markings carved into the table to count the passing days. Each mark feels like a conversation with time itself. The cabin grows richer not with possessions but with meaning. A letter from a settler's child describes how her mother painted the inside of their cabin walls with crushed berries mixed into lard, giving the wood a reddish tint. The scent lasted for weeks, she said, and the room glowed as if lit by an unseen sunset. You imagine that, the way light might catch the colored wood and make it seem almost alive. You take a small piece of charcoal from the hearth and draw faint lines along the wall near your bed. Nothing elaborate, just a few shapes. The marks remind you that humans have always drawn on their shelters, from cave walls to city apartments. Every home begins as a blank surface, waiting for proof that someone lived there. As you sit near the fire, you think about how this space has changed you. The first nights were filled with fear and exhaustion. Now there is calm, even a kind of grace. You have learned the rhythm of wood, the patience of smoke, the secret language of warmth. The cabin no longer feels temporary. It has grown roots in your mind. Evening arrives in soft shades of blue and grey. The snow outside reflects the firelight through the window, turning the room into a glowing cocoon. You ladle hot soup into a wooden bowl, the scent filling the air. Steam curls upward like the breath of something content. A curious observation from a 19th century preacher who travelled through frontier towns reads, "People first survive their homes, then their homes begin to teach them how to live." You nod at that line, because it feels true. The house is no longer just shelter from the cold. It has become your teacher in patience, endurance, and simplicity. Before bed, you sweep the floor carefully, stack the logs, and sit one last time by the fire. The flames flicker against the walls, illuminating every small imperfection you once thought ugly. Now they look like details in a painting. The light finds the pine cone, the spoon, the curtain, and finally your face, soft with quiet pride. When you lie down, the bed feels warmer, the air gentler. The cabin sighs as it cools, wood shifting softly. You close your eyes and think of all the other homes hidden in the wilderness, each one glowing in the night, each one a small defiance against the cold. The world outside remains frozen, but inside, warmth has taken shape not just as heat, but as belonging. You pull the blanket close, listen to the fire breathe, and drift into sleep surrounded by the simple beauty of things made by hand, cared for by heart. The morning light filters through the window, softer than before, a pale shimmer that makes the frost sparkle like powdered glass. You sit up slowly, listening. The air outside is calm for once. No wind, no crack of frozen trees, only silence so complete it feels alive. You pull on your boots and open the door a few inches. The world beyond your cabin is white and endless. The snow drifts high against the trees, swallowing the lower branches. The stillness feels fragile, like something that could shatter with a single sound. You step outside, boots crunching softly, and the quiet folds around you. For the first time, you hear how silence has its own tone, a low hum that seems to come from the earth itself. Then, faintly, another sound breaks through a distant voice. At first, you think it might be the wind catching in the valley, but it comes again, a wordless call carried on the air. You hold your breath and listen. Voices across snow have a strange power. They seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Many accounts from settlers describe hearing such sounds during winter storms. Some said they were travelers lost on the trail. Others swore the wind itself mimicked human voices to test their courage. You remember one story of a man who followed those phantom calls for hours and found only his own echo. Still, curiosity was both a danger and a comfort. It meant the world was not entirely mute. You call out softly, just once. Your own voice scatters like dust, swallowed instantly by the cold air. The echo returns faint but steady, bouncing between the trees. For a moment it feels like a conversation. You stand there, your breath rising, and realize how deeply you crave another voice, something warm to break the vastness. Inside the cabin again, the fire greets you with its steady murmur. You sit near it, rubbing your hands, thinking about the people scattered across this wilderness, each one cocooned in their own island of heat. Somewhere nearby, another fire burns, another voice hums a tune into the storm. That thought steadies you. In one preserved letter written during the winter of 1856, a young woman described sitting by her fire while a blizzard raged outside. She wrote that she imagined every family in the valley doing the same, their hearths glowing like lanterns under the snow. "We cannot see each other," she said, "but I know we are together in the warmth. You understand that now. The connection is invisible, yet it binds you just as tightly as walls of wood and clay." The afternoon fades into grey, the kind of light that blurs time. You boil water for tea, drop in a few dried leaves, and watch them swirl like tiny dancers before sinking. The smell fills the cabin, earthy and sweet. As you drink, your thoughts drift to the letters and journals left behind by those who came before. Their words have carried through time like voices across the snow, faint but clear enough to hear if you listen closely. One diary from a homesteader's son speaks of nights when the wind grew so fierce that the family could not sleep. To keep fear away, they took turns reading aloud from whatever books they had brought. When the words ran out, they made up stories of their own. "We told them until we forgot the cold," he wrote. Storytelling became a kind of heat, rising from the mouth like breath, wrapping everyone in a layer of comfort no fire could give. You decide to speak aloud yourself, not to anyone but the space. The words come haltingly at first. You tell the story of your arrival, your first storm, your first fire that nearly went out. You speak until the silence begins to listen, until the sound of your own voice fills the cabin like a melody. It feels foolish and sacred all at once. There are researchers who believe that loneliness shaped the emotional resilience of frontier life as much as hardship did. People learned to talk to their homes, to their fires, to the sky, because they had to. Solitude became a teacher, a mirror reflecting both strength and longing. You look around your cabin and feel the truth of that. Every log seems to hold a piece of your voice now, soaked into the wood. Evening deepens. You light a candle, its small flame trembling in the draught. The wind returns, not as a storm but as a soft whisper. Through the faint roar of it, you think you hear something again, another sound, distant and human. Perhaps laughter, perhaps song. You cannot tell. It might be your imagination, but it fills you with warmth all the same. In a fragment of an old letter, A traveler wrote that on nights like this he could hear his wife's voice in the wind. Not the words, he said, only the tone of her, like a memory that refuses to freeze. You lean closer to the window and listen harder. The wind's voice rises and falls in a rhythm too deliberate to be random. Whether it is real or not no longer matters. It feels like company. You whisper a few words in return. Not a prayer exactly, more like a greeting. The wind answers with a sigh that rattles the shutters lightly, then fades into stillness. The exchange leaves you smiling. You have learned that conversation does not always need response. Sometimes, speaking into the cold is enough to remind you that you are still alive. The fire has burned low now, its embers glowing faintly. You cover them with ash, just as your ancestors might have done centuries before, trusting that they will still breathe tomorrow. You crawl into bed, the quilt heavy, the silence returning to its gentle hum. Outside, the moon breaks through the clouds, casting faint silver light across the frozen forest. Somewhere, perhaps miles away, another person might be looking at the same moon, feeling the same chill, hearing the same wind. That thought settles in you like warmth spreading through your chest. You close your eyes, and the cabin fades around you. The last thing you hear is the wind's long sigh sweeping past the chimney, a voice older than language itself, reminding you that even in isolation, you are part of the same endless story. The snow has started to melt in tiny patches near the stream. You notice it first by sound, the faint trickle of water weaving its way beneath the ice. It is a shy, secret noise, almost embarrassed to exist after months of silence. You kneel beside the edge, brush away a handful of slush, and watch the current begin to move again. The world, it seems, is slowly remembering how to live. You gather your tools, set them by the door, and sit at the table, hands idle for once. The cabin smells faintly of wax, wood smoke, and pine resin. Each scent is familiar, yet together they form something new, a fragrance of survival. You glance at the shelves you carved weeks ago, the curtain, the spoon, the pine cone. Every small thing has a purpose, yet none of them exist merely for function. Each is a piece of proof that you endured the quiet and found beauty inside it. The change of season always stirred invention. Records from frontier families describe a sudden burst of creativity in early spring. As the snow began to soften, people repaired tools, built fences, and tinkered with whatever they had left idle through winter. The long silence of the cold months had given their imaginations time to ferment. Out of boredom, they became engineers. You look around your cabin now and feel that same restless urge. The walls are sturdy, the roof sound, yet there is always room for improvement. Your eyes fall on the hearth. The smoke still sometimes escapes into the room, instead of rising neatly through the chimney. You study the problem, remembering a passage you once read in a traveler's account. He wrote that an old craftsman had shown him how to place a simple shelf of wood above the fire to redirect the air, pulling smoke upward. You decide to try it. You search through your pile of leftover wood and find a flat piece of plank, blackened slightly at the edges. The smell of resin clings to it. You saw it carefully, then hammer it into place just above the opening of the hearth. When you light the fire again, you watch in quiet satisfaction as the smoke swirls upward, caught by the change in air. The room clears faster than before. For the first time, you can sit by the fire without your eyes stinging. In a letter found in an archive from 1843, a settler described building a contraption of tin plates to circulate heat from his stove across the room. He had no idea he had invented the first rudimentary heat deflector, yet he wrote proudly that his wife no longer complained about cold feet while cooking. Innovation, you realize, does not come from genius, but from noticing discomfort. Your mind begins to wander with possibilities. What else can you make from what little you have? You carve hooks from small branches and hang them near the door for tools. You patch a small leak along the window frame with sap and cloth. You add a second shelf near the bed, for candles and cups. Each improvement feels like both progress and conversation, the house quietly approving with every small tap of the hammer. A curious entry from a carpenter's notebook mentions that some settlers turned broken wagon wheels into ceiling racks, hanging pots, herbs, and even clothing from the spokes. You imagine doing the same and make a mental note to look for spare pieces of wood once the thaw comes. The idea feels both practical and poetic, a circle above your head turning remnants of travel into permanence. As afternoon fades, the sun sends a ribbon of light through the window. It stretches across the floor, lands on the wall, and touches your new shelf. Dust motes dance through the beam, suspended like tiny stars. You lean back in your chair and watch, letting the stillness fill you. There are researchers who suggest that human creativity flourishes in hardship precisely because the mind craves purpose when comfort is scarce. Every frontier invention, from heating stones to handmade candles, was born from the same simple need, to make the world a little kinder. You think of that as you trace your hand along the table's rough edge. Invention here is not ambition. It is tenderness, translated into wood and fire. Evening draws in gently. You light your lamp and pour a little oil from the tin you traded for last week. The flame blooms with a golden halo, steady and patient. You notice how the new shelf above the hearth reflects some of that light, doubling its glow. The cabin suddenly seems brighter, not by much, but enough to make you smile. A letter from a young blacksmith in 1871 captures this same feeling. He wrote that his favorite sound in winter was not the crack of his forge, but the soft hiss of oil when it caught the flame. That sound, he said, is the world remembering it can change. You hear that echo now in the hiss of your lamp and feel a kinship across time. You tidy your tools, coil the leftover twine, and sit again by the fire. The air feels lighter, less smoky, more open. You can breathe without coughing. You look at your hands, blistered and cracked, and realize how much they have learned since the first day you swung an axe in the snow. They have built, repaired, adapted, and imagined. The hands of survival are not heroic, only persistent. Outside, the first stars appear. You open the door briefly, and the night greets you with its cool breath. The sound of running water from the stream is louder now, clear and alive. The ice is retreating. You smile, close the door, and return to your chair. The cabin glows with firelight and lamplight, the air thick with warmth and quiet satisfaction. You lean back, resting your head against the wall, and let your eyes close. The house hums softly around you, the wood expanding in the heat, the fire sighing as it burns. For the first time, you sense that you have not only survived the winter but shaped it into something beautiful. You drift towards sleep with a small smile. Outside, the snow continues to melt, drop by drop, carrying away the last traces of fear. Inside, invention has turned into peace. When you wake, the air feels lighter, as if winter has finally released its grip. The snow outside glistens with patches of exposed earth, and tiny rivulets of water run through the yard, weaving around stones and twigs. You step out into the morning, boots sinking slightly, and breathe in a smell you had almost forgotten. Damp soil, green moss, and thaw. The world smells alive again. Your stomach growls softly, reminding you that supplies are running low. The beans you traded for are nearly gone, the dried meat thin and pale. It is time to think about food that warms more than the body, something that stirs memory and comfort. The thought of cooking fills you with quiet purpose. Inside, you set a pot over the fire and pour in the last of your beans with some melted snow. You stir them slowly, adding a pinch of salt and the smallest scrap of dried sage. The scent begins to bloom, soft and earthy. Food here is not a feast. It is an act of gratitude. Every meal carries the memory of the hands that gathered, traded, and endured. Frontier families measured time by meals. Journals often describe soup simmering through the day, thickening as more ingredients were found or bartered. One woman wrote that the smell of broth was the scent of waiting. the steady heartbeat of the home. You can understand that now as the steam curls upward, fogging your window and softening the room into a watercolor of warmth. As the pot simmers, you knead a small batch of dough from flour saved in a tin. You mix it with a splash of warm water and a bit of ash from the fire, a trick you learned from an old note scrawled in a margin of a diary. The alkaline ash helps the dough rise, faintly sweet and smoky when baked near the coals. You shape the dough into rough rounds, place them on a hot stone beside the fire, and listen as they sizzle softly. The smell fills the room, rich and familiar. Letters from travelers in the early 1800s mention how food took on symbolic weight during the cold months. Bread was more than sustenance, it was a promise that the world still provided. To break bread was to break fear. Soup, too, carried meaning. Some added dried apples or a splash of vinegar, not only for flavor, but to remind themselves of the brighter seasons waiting beyond the frost. As you stir your pot again, you remember a story told by one trader about a cabin that never went dark, because the family kept soup simmering every hour of winter. Strangers could knock at any time and be offered a bowl. He said the smell of that house could be recognized from a mile away. It smelled like kindness, he wrote. You smile at the thought and wish you could visit such a place. You take the bread from the stone, its crust golden and uneven, and break it apart. The inside is soft, steam curling out. You dip a piece into the soup and taste it. The flavor is simple but alive. Salt, smoke, and earth. You chew slowly, eyes closed, and for a moment, you are not alone. The warmth seems to echo through time, touching every hand that ever stirred a pot by firelight. Historians sometimes argue that frontier cuisine was a symbol of both limitation and creativity. Scarcity forced invention, but it also preserved connection. A shared recipe, even between distant cabins, became a thread linking people through flavor. You think of that as you add a little melted fat to your soup, watching it shimmer on the surface like a thin sheet of gold. When the meal is done, you set the spoon down and listen to the fire's gentle hiss. The smell of beans and bread lingers in the air, mingling with the smoke and pine. You remember that taste and scent are memories made physical. They tether the present to all the moments that came before. Somewhere far away, another cabin might smell the same right now. Another person stirring a similar pot, their breath fogging the same chill air. In a letter discovered decades later, a man wrote about tasting his mother's soup again after years apart. He said it was like hearing a lullaby in a language I thought I had forgotten. You know what he meant. The flavor of warmth is always half nostalgia, half need. Evening arrives quietly, blue and soft. The snow outside glows faintly under the fading light. You pour the last of the soup into a cup and set it beside the window, watching the steam rise against the frost. It feels almost like an offering, a thank you to the world that has both tested and nourished you. You clean the pot, stack the dishes neatly, and sit near the fire. The warmth reaches your face, steady and sure. You breathe in deeply, feeling the fullness of both belly and heart. The simplest meal has turned into a kind of ceremony. Outside, the wind stirs again, gentle this time, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth. You smile, pull your blanket around your shoulders, and close your eyes. Somewhere deep within you, the warmth of that meal continues to glow, the quiet proof that life, even pared down to its bones, can still taste of comfort. The snow melts in uneven patches now, leaving streaks of brown earth across the hills like a slowly waking body. The sound of dripping water is constant, tapping softly against the roof, sliding down the logs, sinking into the ground. You open the door and step outside, blinking at the light. The air smells of thawing soil and damp pine needles. The world that once slept under a frozen sheet is stirring again. You walk to the stream, its edges breaking apart into small, bright channels. The ice cracks in lazy lines, and tiny bubbles rush beneath the surface. For the first time in months, you hear running water without strain or fear. The sound carries something you had forgotten: movement, life, the slow rhythm of change. In the distance, a column of smoke rises from the valley. It looks thicker now, steadier than before. You realize the neighbors are back at work, mending fences, clearing paths, calling to each other across the drifts. You can almost hear their laughter carried faintly on the air. It strikes you how quickly a single fire became many. Settlements grew this way, from one cabin to two, then to a dozen, until a loose cluster of homes began to call itself a town. Journals from early communities describe those first gatherings of spring, when families ventured out after months of isolation. They brought bread, stories, and news. Babies born, livestock lost, storms survived. Everything worth knowing traveled by word of mouth. You walk a little farther, your boots sinking in the wet snow. The sunlight catches the melting ice, throwing shards of light in every direction. The air feels warmer against your face, soft but real. You think of all those families across history, stepping out of their cabins after long winters, blinking at the same light, grateful to see color return to the world. In a letter from 1849, a farmer wrote that the first day of true thaw was as close to grace as a man might stand. He said the smell of wet earth reminded him that forgiveness was built into the seasons. The land always returned what it took, if you waited long enough. You crouched to touch the ground, pressing your hand against the cold, damp soil. It feels alive beneath your palm, pulsing faintly, like the heart of the year restarting. By noon, the sun is high enough to warm the walls of your cabin. You open the door wide to let fresh air sweep through. It moves gently, stirring the curtains, carrying away months of smoke and stillness. Dust rises in faint golden swirls, glowing briefly in the light before disappearing. The scent of pine, clay, and melting snow fills the space. The cabin feels new again, as though the season has rebuilt it alongside you. Some early records tell of how people celebrated the end of winter with small rituals. They swept the floors with fresh branches, lit new fires from embers, and sprinkled water on the hearth as a blessing. You decide to follow their example. You take a cup of snowmelt, splash a little over the hearth, and whisper a few words without thinking, part gratitude, part farewell to the long night. The fire hisses softly, as if nodding back. You spend the afternoon outside, clearing snow from the roof, checking for damage. The logs have darkened from months of frost, their surfaces rough and streaked. You scrape away the ice with the back of your axe, listening to the satisfying thud of each strike. Every blow feels like punctuation, marking the end of something that held you too long. There is an entry in a preacher's travel journal describing how, after each winter, families rebuilt their homes even if they did not have to. He wrote, "To survive is one thing. To begin again is holy work. You feel that truth in your muscles as you labor, sweat forming beneath your coat despite the cold air. Repetition becomes prayer. When the sun begins to dip, you sit on a stump outside your cabin and look across the valley. The snow still glows in the hollows, but patches of brown and green are spreading like slow fire. The smoke from your chimney rises in a thin, golden column, joining the others in the distance. For the first time since autumn, the world feels connected again. Inside, you light a candle and prepare a small supper, bread and broth, simple but satisfying. The warmth of the fire mingles with the cool air flowing through the door. You eat slowly, gazing at the fading light through your window. Historians have long noted that as settlements grew, the idea of home changed. What began as a shelter became a gathering place, a shared symbol of endurance. Even when the towns expanded and wood gave way to brick, the hearth remained the heart of it all. People carried that instinct forward, the same urge to sit close, to share warmth, to listen to another voice before sleep. You think about that as you sip your broth. The cabin that once stood alone will not always be solitary. Roads will come, fences will divide, laughter will fill the air, but the essence will remain, the small circle of light pushing back against the dark. Outside, twilight deepens. The wind carries the smell of wet earth through the open door, mingled with the faint sweetness of pine. The sound of running water joins the low hum of night. You sit for a while longer, breathing it all in, before closing the door and feeding the fire one last time. The room glows softly, your shadow moving across the walls. You stretch out on your bed, tired but peaceful, your hands still smelling faintly of soil and smoke. The winter is not yet gone, but you can feel the thaw inside you too. The world is beginning again, and so are you. The morning air feels gentler now, carrying a scent you almost forgot existed. The smell of wet bark, old leaves, and the faint sweetness of thawing grass. You open the door, and the breeze touches your face with the cool promise of early spring. Beyond your cabin, patches of green push through the dull snow, stubborn as hope. The forest hums softly, filled with water dripping from the trees. The season has turned the page. Inside, your cabin looks different in this new light. The smoke stains on the ceiling seem softer, almost golden. The walls, once dry and grey, have absorbed months of warmth and now glow faintly with life. You look around and realize that everything inside has become a record of your survival. The burn mark near the hearth from a spark that jumped too far, the small dent in the table where your knife slipped, the uneven shelf that still manages to hold steady. These imperfections no longer bother you. They feel like the handwriting of time. You sit by the fire and let the silence settle. The logs crackle gently, the same sound that once filled the longest nights. But now, it no longer feels like defiance. It feels like a greeting. You stir the embers with the tip of a stick and watch them glow, orange and patient. A letter from an early settler describes how people, when spring arrived, would sit by their hearths not out of need but out of habit. After months of relying on fire to stay alive, they could not easily give up its company. It had become more than heat. It was a companion that had seen every struggle. You understand that completely. The fire is not just light anymore. It is memory. Later, as the day brightens, you step outside and walk to the edge of the clearing. From here you can see the distant hills, the snow slipping away in streaks. Thin trails of smoke rise from other homes, faint but visible. For months, those chimneys were hidden by storms, but now they mark a quiet return to community. You imagine the families behind them, opening their doors, airing out their rooms, sweeping away the ghosts of winter. It is said that people who live close to nature learn to read time differently. Instead of clocks, they measure days by shadows, seasons by scent, and years by the creak of old wood. You look down at your hands, lined with soot and work, and realize they are a kind of calendar too. Each scar tells the story of effort, each callus a lesson learned. There is an old diary from a carpenter who claimed he could tell how old a cabin was just by touching its walls. "Wood remembers," he wrote. "It keeps the heat of each fire, the rhythm of each storm, and the softness of each spring." You press your hand against your own wall now, and believe him. The surface is warm, but beneath it lies the cool pulse of the forest, steady and eternal. You decide to take a walk through the woods. The snow crunches lightly underfoot, mixed with the sound of water running beneath it. The trees smell of resin and wet moss. Somewhere ahead, you hear the faint tapping of a woodpecker, and from farther away, a trickle of melting ice falling from a branch. Every sound feels like an invitation to rejoin the world. A curious note in an old journal from a fur trader describes how, in early spring, the forest seemed to exhale after winter. "The silence breaks open," he wrote, "and you can almost hear the roots waking. As you walk, you notice that the ground beneath you gives slightly as if breathing. The earth is softening again. You find a fallen branch, stripped of bark by weather, smooth and pale. You pick it up and carry it home, unsure why. Back at the cabin, you carve it into a small frame and set it near the window. It holds nothing yet, but somehow it feels like a promise, a space waiting to be filled. Maybe one day, when life feels settled, you will place a picture inside, or a pressed leaf, or a drawing made by a visitor. For now, it simply stands as a symbol of what lies ahead. By afternoon, the air warms enough that you can leave the door open without losing heat. Sunlight spills inside, touching every surface, lighting the cabin in ways you have never seen before. You sit on your stool and watch the light move slowly across the floor. The sound of water dripping from the eaves forms a soft rhythm, steady as breath. Historians often note that frontier cabins began as necessities and ended as sanctuaries. People who built them to escape the elements eventually found that they had built something more, a small center of peace in a vast and unpredictable world. You look around your cabin now and feel that truth rising in you. This place that once held your fear now holds your calm. Evening comes in soft hues of lavender and gold. The fire burns low, steady and gentle. You boil water for tea, the scent of dried mint filling the air again. When you lift the cup to your lips, you can taste the faint memory of snow, as if winter has left a signature in the steam. You sit quietly and watch the last of the light fade through the window. Outside, the trees are dark against the sky, but the air carries the sound of melting ice dropping from their branches. It feels like applause, soft and slow, celebrating the end of the long season. Before you lie down, you step outside once more. The stars are sharp and bright, the air cool but not cruel. You close your eyes and listen to the night. Somewhere in the distance an owl calls, its voice calm and ancient. You smile. Spring has not fully arrived, but it is close enough to believe in. You return inside, close the door gently, and lie in your bed. The room is warm. The fire hums softly, and the faint scent of thaw drifts through the cracks. You pull the quilt up to your chin, whisper a small thanks to the walls that have held you through every storm, and let yourself drift into sleep, carried by the rhythm of a world learning to breathe again. The morning comes quietly, as if afraid to disturb the peace it has found. Light spills through your small window in a soft golden wash, and the air feels gentle against your face. The birds have returned. You hear their hesitant calls from the trees, a melody that grows in confidence with every note. After so many months of silence, the sound feels like music written for you alone. You sit up slowly, pull the blanket from your shoulders, and listen. The cabin has stopped creaking from the cold. The wood sounds different now, almost content. You step barefoot onto the floor, warm from the fire that burned through the night. The air smells faintly of earth and pine resin. You walk to the door, push it open, and stand there for a long moment. The world outside is reborn. The snow has retreated into the shadows, leaving behind a quilt of damp soil, moss, and the first tiny green shoots of grass. A small stream runs clear and quick through the meadow. The forest that once felt haunted by silence now hums with life. You can hear the faint buzz of insects waking beneath the bark and the whisper of wind through branches that no longer carry weight. You breathe deeply, and for the first time the air tastes of spring. It carries no bitterness, only renewal. You remember the first nights in this cabin, the fear, the cold, the endless noise of wind. Now there is only calm. Every hardship that once pressed against these walls has melted into something softer. The cabin has become a part of the landscape, just as you have. You step out onto the damp ground, boots sinking slightly in the mud. Your breath no longer turns to frost. The sunlight warms your hands, and you feel it sinking into your skin, chasing away the last chill of the season. The wind carries the faint smell of thawed moss and sap. You close your eyes, and in that moment, you are not a builder, not a survivor, but simply a part of the earth breathing again. In the journals of settlers, this season was often called the forgiving time. After months of endurance, the land repaid its debt with gentleness. The rivers opened, animals returned, and seeds hidden deep beneath the soil stirred once more. People planted gardens not just for food, but as symbols of faith that the world could still be trusted. You kneel and run your fingers through the soft earth near your door. It feels alive, pliant, ready. You dig a small hole with your hands and drop in a few dried seeds saved from last year's trade, a handful of beans, maybe a sprig of mint. You cover them carefully, patting the earth smooth, and whisper a small promise to return each day to see what becomes of them. Inside, the fire burns low, but you let it fade. You will not need it much longer. You pour water into a cup and set it on the table, the same table that held your tools, your meals, and your quiet thoughts through the long winter. Every mark on its surface tells a story. The first spark that scared you, the candle wax dripped from lonely nights, the scratches from your knife when patience ran short. You run your hand across the wood and smile. Imperfection, you have learned, is the truest signature of life. Historians often speak of the frontier as a place of hardship, but they rarely write about the peace that followed. The quiet mornings when families stepped outside, heard the first birds, and felt that they had earned every sound. Survival was not only about strength, it was about learning to listen to the world's smallest mercies. You sit by the window as sunlight floods the cabin. The curtain stirs in the breeze, and dust floats lazily in the air, shimmering like pollen. You feel a stillness that is not emptiness, but completion. You think of all those who came before, who built homes from forests and faith, who stitched quilts from rags and wove warmth from patience. You are part of them now. The story continues through your hands, your breath, your small cabin that has seen both frost and fire. Evening comes soft and slow. You light a candle, not out of need but out of affection. The flame flickers gently, casting gold on the walls that have watched over you. You pour the last of your tea, lift it to your lips, and drink in the quiet. Outside, the frogs begin to sing by the stream, their calls echoing between the trees. It feels like a lullaby written by the earth itself. You lie down on your bed, quilt pulled lightly over you. The air is cool but kind, the smell of thaw drifting through the cracks. You close your eyes, listening to the world that no longer feels distant or hostile. The forest breathes. The cabin breathes. You breathe. The hardest nights are behind you. The storms have become stories. The fire has become memory. And the home you built, plank by plank, thought by thought, now belongs to the quiet rhythm of the land. The warmth you once built to keep death away has become the warmth of life itself. So now, as the last light fades beyond the forest, let the rhythm of your breath match the slow rise and fall of the land around you. Imagine the cabin in its stillness, the air filled with the scent of smoke and soft pine, the faint glow of the dying fire casting calm shadows on the walls. The storms have passed. The long winter has become memory. The house stands quiet, not because the world has grown silent, but because peace has settled into every corner. Outside, the stars are beginning to bloom. Each one appears slowly, patient and deliberate, like embers scattered across the night. You watch them shimmer above the trees, the same constellations seen by all who ever built a home against the cold. Their light reminds you that survival is not about struggle but about belonging to the earth, to time, to the gentle persistence of life itself. Inside, your breathing slows. The quilt feels heavier now, soft against your skin. The fire hums quietly, its warmth lingering even as it fades. Every sound becomes part of the same tender silence. The whisper of wind through the cracks, the creak of wood shifting, the heartbeat of the night beyond your walls. The journey ends where it began, in stillness, in warmth, in gratitude. You have built a home not just of wood and stone, but of patience and care. The world outside may freeze again someday, but you know now that comfort can always be built, flame by flame, breath by breath. Sleep well, traveler. The house will keep watch. The night is kind.